All right, we're back with It's Server Time Redux. Many did not think this day was possible, but here it is. We brought back the show from the grave. It's been 10 months since the last episode. It was in December of 2022, canceled for a variety of reasons, but I wanted to make sure that we got our eulogies in, got to say our farewells to CSGO. This podcast obviously had a great run when it was going on, and I wanted to make sure that everybody here was platformed to give their takes, their feelings, and what made them happy about CSGO. So we've got a handful of topics, but before we even get into that, let me reintroduce my co-hosts. We've got Pronogo on the ones and twos, the producer of the show. Many will know him for his ridiculous takes and the fact that he went from being behind the camera to being in front of it because we liked how ridiculous he could be. We've got Mix, part-time wrestler, part-time or just like airport employee now, former Cloud9 Colossus participating member.
I left video games. I bought a house. I got a wife. Game's fucking cringe.
Yeah. And then we got we got Note, of course. We got Note, of course. Still HLTV staff writer. I don't know if your position has changed, Note. Is it still what's your official title actually?
Senior staff writer.
Senior staff writer.
I was still senior staff during the last show.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
well, there it is. Okay. Yeah, I mean, let's just get into it. Like, last 10 months, I mean, I think, like, people kind of get what Note and I have been doing, but what about Mix and Pronogo? So, Mix, I know things have changed for you, so what's going on in your life?
Oh, well, I was like, hey, I'll give CS another shot. I'll fucking work with some young NA team. Made the RMR, didn't get to go to the RMR, that broke my fucking heart. And so I said, fuck this, and went to do other things. And right now I'm kind of enjoying, like, the other stuff I'm doing. I went, like, as far away from a computer as possible, which is really what I needed. But yeah, I still kind of, like, follow Counter-Strike mostly. I follow Counter-Strike just because I like Counter-Strike, and I follow NA Valorant to hate watch NA Valorant.
There it is. Okay. Yeah, for people that don't remember this, earlier this year, Mix's team actually made it through the closed qualifiers for the America's RMR for the Paris Major, and one of your players couldn't, I think maybe, was it two of your players couldn't get visa?
Yeah, okay. One of them, I mean, it was fucking crazy. Like, one of them just fucked up his, like, passport application. It was like,
yes,
that sucked, like, but, like, shit happens. Like, I was gonna go, we were gonna still play, like, I was gonna have to play. We would have lost, like, 0-2, obviously, but, like, would have been fun at least, like, seeing everyone. Yeah. And then the other one, Brett, had, like, medical issues, and he ended up getting diagnosed with cancer, like, the week before. Oh. But no, he's still playing, like, he's fine now, like, he did fine, and, like, chemo and all that stuff, so I'm glad that Brett's doing okay, and obviously, like, things worked out on that end, so, but yeah.
So you got hit with a double whammy of timing. Yeah.
I was just like, what the fuck is this? Like, how does this happen? Like, the craziest shit just happens. But yeah. And after that, I was like...
Yeah, it was massively unlucky.
Because I remember, I was the one that, like, first brought to light that, like, Valve or Blast wasn't sending coaches to the RMR. And then that started, like, the whole community thing. I was the first person, like, talk about it on Twitter. So I felt like I had really earned that, like, the RMR, and then still didn't get it. And I was like, dude, I can't keep doing this. Like, this just sucks so much.
And it turns out Valve specifically wasn't sending you. Everybody else got in, but...
Yeah.
That's true.
All my teammates were there.
And Pronogo, what have you been up to for the last 10 months?
Yeah, I've been hard in the paint when it comes to the game development stuff. So it's not really much that would be super relevant to CS interests because it's, working on RTS stuff. I am working on an FPS now, but it's not. It's like a retro shooter like Doom and stuff. So it's very different than what you'll see out of the new fancy CS2 graphics. And I have been watching Counter-Strike as well, although I'll admit the interest has waned a bit. I think, there's been a lot of conversation since the last episode that we had between pundits and just the community at large saying, well, is the meta kind of stale right now? Are the teams even trying? What's going on? And I definitely think you saw a little bit of that with the advent of CS2 around the corner and, like, some tournaments still using it. And, obviously we only recently, like, a couple days ago had the actual last CSGO match, even though CS2 has been out and playable for a while. Well, playable is debatable depending on who you ask, I guess. But out and available for you to hit the play button. And it's been interesting watching the transition from one to the other. Was it smooth? Maybe it could have been smoother, you could say. But I'm interested to see where the game goes now, because obviously the engine upgrade, everybody would always say, yeah, source 2. And I pointed this out in the pre-show too. It's like we had this whole idea of, in our previous episode, giving predictions, one positive, one negative prediction for CS. None of us said CS2. None of us were like, oh yeah, there's going to be source 2 coming. So I think it was a pretty big, seismic shift, but maybe looking back, it makes sense, right? It's been a long time where we've been stuck on the Source 1 engine. So happy to be here. Happy to be back on the show, obviously, but also happy to have a new engine to look at, because even if it's rough right now, eventually, in theory, it'll get better.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that's the goal. That's the hope. If it doesn't get better, well, this game's gonna suck. I'm gonna be real.
Yeah, you guys can
but,
come. You guys can come do esports analysis for my tiny tournaments that we have for the RTS stuff that I'm working on.
Totally.
So.
You'll just feed me the information on the meta, and I'll just regurgitate it.
All right, sounds good.
I would feel bad if I didn't include Note on what he's been up to, but no, anything changed in your life?
Not much in terms of work. I moved in with my girlfriend in June, so that was fun. We have a nice place.
Nice.
But yeah, other than that, not too much. It's been just busy as fuck over the last few months, and that's kind of it.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'd say all right then. I guess one thing for me that changed is I moved from London, living with James Bardoff, to now living in my own apartment in Queens, New York. I'm recording at my parents' place, which is funny because it's the place I was recording episode 40 final episode, but I don't actually live with my parents, guys. I live in my own apartment, but I just happened to record this at my parents' place again. Okay, let's get into it. So the first topic that we're going to be diving into is, throughout the history of CSGO, who were our 3 favorite players to watch? Okay, I'm going to start in reverse order from the intros here. So Note. Actually, wait, that means I'm going first. You know what? Fuck, I'm going first on this. I always tell other people to go first on things like that. You know what? I'm just gonna
take it over. He's just taking over the show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go first on this one. This is gonna be a totally self-serving answer for number 1. One of my favorite players to watch.
Nafani.
Nafani, no. One of my favorite players to watch, who made the online era interesting for me, was Yekindar. He was a 2-time guest on the show, but I will say that in an era that was rather devoid of personality or flair from individuals, Yekindar was doing so much to make some of those games way more interesting. Not even in terms of personality, which he has a boatload of, but obviously in terms of play. Everybody remembers how sharp he was in terms of his entry routes. How it felt like I think people the way it felt to watch Yekindar when he was playing online was I honestly felt like it was a trigger bot sometimes. He was so fast with any time someone entered his crosshair, whether he was holding an angle or pushing into a new one, just instantly deleted them from the server. Just super explosive. And I also think that it was easy to enjoy him because you contrasted him with the rest of his team and what would happen after he died. And then you'd be like, well, this guy's the only reason to watch this team. So it was fun like that as well. You guys have thoughts on Yekindar?
Yeah, when he was a 1-2 puncher with James, definitely made Virtus Pro watchable, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I mean, he was one that I considered for my list, but I left him out ultimately. But those were basically the reasons that I was considering, was that he did make that era of Counter-Strike that was ultra boring and at times to actually kind of interesting and fun.
I agree with Panogo, just in terms of him being paired with Shame is still the most interesting thing looking back on it.
Yeah.
Just have 2 complete opposite spectrums, and I feel like it really worked really well. And I mean, I just love that type of shit. 2 completely different types of players on the same team, creating a very unique style. I think that shit's awesome.
Yeah, I would say like the underrated thing about his game too was I would actually really like on CT side when he would just have to hold angles, which felt like a rarity for him, but when he did, he was so good at it too. And I feel like that sort of was forgotten because everybody remembers his T side antics, or even on CT side when he would push as well, how much flair he could show. But when he had to just become a normal rifler in moments and just be fairly static, he was also really good at it too, which is why his rating was obviously very high. That he had some more dimensions to his game than what people drew up as a caricature of him. Okay, the second player I have, my last two are really typical. So sorry they don't have as much. Like I was like, okay, let me be honest with myself. Who did I really like watching? Number two for me was Coldzera. This like it when watching the old SK LG lineups, it just had that aura around him in late round situations where it was still possible, and it felt. And I went back and actually watched some cold stuff before the show, and I was like, there's no player in this era that kind of makes me think of what Rops became more than Coldzera, where he was so diligent with angle clears. He was so sure to either use the good information that he had from his team in order to like assess the situation properly, or he was just incredibly slow and like careful, which ended up meaning that he was not going to get caught off by like a stupid off angle, or he was not going to get caught off by a one and done or anything like that. Like he was still finding ways to push forward and take space, but do it like with these very concerted effort peaks repeatedly. And so for Cole, like the amount of ridiculous clutches this guy had, not even just thinking about his crazy highlight moments like the B Mirage jumping op shots, which of course is another reason why he was a favorite player to watch, but like beyond that, just like any
It's triggered me.
1v2. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure the NA fan base definitely doesn't love that moment, but like it's like all time. It's an all time great highlight,
Yeah.
and I think many people would say it's their number one highlight, even if it's random. It's just the context of it was so ridiculous. But I'm saying even well beyond that, like even the random tournament 1v1, 1v2, like he just seemed to never mess those things up and always give SK a chance in those. So honestly, like yeah, Coldzera, like it's kind of hard. Like it made that team, even if it felt like the strat broke, he would find a way to unbreak it.
Yeah. As a certified LG SK hater at the time, I fucking hated watching him because Coldzera was like the perfect player, and it really fucking pissed me off.
I think there's a reason that back then as well he was considered like the Brazilian Terminator.
Yeah.
Like his nickname was literally the Brazilian Terminator because he just seemed unkillable in a lot of those situations. And usually, if you did end up meeting him in late rounds, like he was almost always going to lock you out of he did seem almost unkillable in like 1v2 situations sometimes, or even in like 2v2s. That aura that he had was just insane back then, because I remember watching their games and you could never count that team out in like any sort of like, even like a 2v4, their retakes were absurd, and the way they bounced off between Coldzera's multi-kill potential and then also Fallen's aggressive opping was just really fun to watch. Like that team just genuinely like had one of the most fun dynamics to just watch on the server, because you had Fur, and then you also had FNX, who was also like quite good at late round clutch situations as well. So it was for me that was a big part of it too.
Yeah, you had like Fallen just going fucking mad on the op, just being annoying. Fur kind of like doing something similar, but on the rifle. FNX like never lost a fucking clutch. Like that guy's in a 1v2, like you just win. And then you had Taco.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Taco was an important piece, undeniably. If you win that much, you're probably a good player, but I just had to throw it.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I think the thing about Cold is that he felt inevitable, whatever his outcome was going to be. That's why he had that nickname in the first place. It's like, it doesn't really matter what the scoreboard says. If his name isn't grayed out, then you still got to watch your back. And in fact, even if you watch your back, you might come out from a different angle why would you expect him there? Like he just had this, it was like predictably unpredictable, I guess, right? It's like no matter what you think is going to happen, like you can predict him winning. You can't tell me how it's going to happen, but he's going to do it. So I thought that was always memorable. It's just like one of those, you don't really see that kind of play style or that kind of phenomenon happen in the current sector of Counter-Strike, right? Where we don't really have that in the same way now. And I do feel like it was really nice to be able to see that and be able to watch that happen and transpire in front of our eyes. So good pick, Maui. Makes sense.
Cold is one of those players, like, if I was, like, watching or, like preparing for their team, like, in their prime,
Yeah.
Cole's one of those players where, like, he doesn't really, like, he probably wouldn't, like, move around that much on the map. Like, he wouldn't have, like, tons of, like, crazy, like, aggro pushes or anything. But he'd be so good at, like, changing up his spot from round to round in, like, just little small ways that just make it so hard to play against him and, like, actually predict, like, what he's going to do. Even if you have, like, the general idea of it, he still just, like, fucks with you in, like, really small ways and still just gets his kills and gets out.
Yeah, one example of that entirely is the way he would play Ivy on Train when he was on CT side. He would play like so many little just kind of off angles and have so many different ways to just sort of default towards there. Like the way he would just crouch back 6 train and just hold that like it's a normal angle when it's like your whole body's exposed, by the way. Like there's no reason you shouldn't be traded, but then he would just get a multi-frag from there because the T's are just swinging out. And for some reason, like, I don't know, he could just always get 2 kills in these weird sort of spots. So yeah, and that's based off of the fact that, you know, he would one round play to the left side of Ivy, one round he would play actually in Hell, one round he'd play like an off angle on the wall or something like that. So it always made him really, really pesky to dislodge. Okay,
I think quickly
yeah.
just to that point, I think the 2 spots that are like most iconic for me in terms of like just how he played them and kind of defined that was Ivy was the big one. Like, I think that's the one that I always think of when I think of Cold, but also the way he played Cat on Mirage was also quite impactful, and also just like I feel like a lot of teams and players adapted the way he played into that.
Yeah, and I think that he was almost ahead of the curve because I think a lot of star players were playing Khan at the time, but then he would play Cat, and I think actually what's funny is the meta kind of chased him, where now, generally speaking, most top riflers or top teams have their quote-unquote best rifler playing Cat.
Yeah.
Okay, my last one is the least imaginative by far, but I'm just going to be honest with it. My favorite player to watch of all time in CSGO is Simple. This is
has to be.
it just has to be. Yeah, he's so ridiculously creative. The way, and the thing is that what I always still love about Simple to this day is that even in tournaments where sometimes it feels like his mechanics are not 100 out of 100, he's still trying to be as aggressive and creative to get back into rounds for his team, sometimes even to his own detriment. And it's obviously we've seen a bit of a drop off in Simple's form this year, but for all the years where he was just such a monster in terms of mechanics, it's nobody else would take the risks that Simple took, and nobody else would pull off the seemingly impossible as frequently as he did. Yeah. And so for Simple, there's just the wow factor, which it doesn't seem like anybody is quite there yet in replicating. I would say that m0NESY is trying the most as frequently as him, and that's probably also why people would probably say, like, you know, m0NESY could still have a ways to improve if he just kind of like tightened up his game. But that's the same thing they were saying about Simple for all the years until he was consecutive number 1, number 2 in the world. Yeah. And so I'd rather see players attempt to be Simple than ZywOo, because I would just be like, you're limit testing to a degree that if you actually improve your ceiling and skill, you can do things nobody else can do, and you can control the game in ways nobody else can.
Yeah, the thing about Simple for me is that you can actually break his career down into like 3 separate arcs. You know, we all love a 3-act structure, right? So the first one is him being super raw, like impossible to really categorize. This is where he's, you know, a mercenary for Liquid, or he's on Hellraisers or whatever in all these like early stages of his career. And this is where he gets that cash, you know, double no scope, falling down, you know, like the most ridiculous plays. That's the kind of stuff, like, how would you even do that, let alone, you know, in a major playoffs, right? And we go into the second arc, which is him just being forged in a crucible. Like, we've seen that he's a talent. Now he has to like try to hard carry Zeus and Edward on Na'Vi, and like go through all these like busted Na'Vi lineups along the way and stuff. And obviously when he finally wins his major, that's really the online era, like right before that with IEM Katowice, before the whole world locked down. Like, that kind of stuff is where we really start to see the third act of his sort of story, where we get to see him have a little bit of support structure around him, and that allows him to become even more superlative with like the highest major MVP rating ever and all these other ridiculous stat lines for Stockholm. And I mean, the fact that, you know, even following that, he makes it back to the grand finals of Antwerp, and like just a ridiculous career. Obviously, he had to be on the list. In fact, I'd be surprised if he wasn't on anybody's list unless they like specifically prepped, like knowing somebody else is going to take it. But Simple is just, he's a guy I'll watch stream FPL just for the plays. Like he's not, I don't even need to be watching a pro game at that point. Like that's pretty rare for somebody like me at the very least to like be, watching somebody stream and being like, yeah, I'm watching for the gameplay, because he really is that good. He does this stuff all the time. So the frequency, the consistency, and the longevity over time is unmatched with this guy. Definitely the goat of the game.
I also think Simple's just unique in the sense that he's one of the most fun players to watch. Like, you'll have players who are really, really good at the game. Like, you can take, like, a Ziwu, or you can even take Cold Zero back then. Like, you have players who are super good at the game, but aren't necessarily the most fun to watch. And then you have Simple, who will do some of the most crazy shit mechanically, but also just the way he, like, has a read on the game and the kind of things that he can pull off are just... They make him such an enigma that he's always somebody. Like, I remember when EPL would be on, and the EPL stream would have like 30K views, and Simple would be at like 60, and people would just be watching Simple instead because it was just better, and he'd be playing like FPL or a pug.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I like to me that also just defines that he's a uniquely fun individual to watch.
So what you're saying is you remember a Simple flick?
I do remember a Simple flick.
Okay, let's see. So I'll go in reverse order. So Note, who are your three favorite players to watch?
Okay, so speaking of flicks, Kenny S was one of the first names that came to mind, because not just prime Kenny S, but even post op nerf Kenny S was still incredibly fun to watch. Not to the same peaks, obviously, but he as an individual back then was just like, you could put him in any close range op situation, be swarmed by like 3 people on a bomb site alone, and he would still pull off some of the most absurd shit that you will see to this day. For an article I'm writing, I actually went back and was like looking at Kenny S highlights from pre-nerf, and it's just stuff that A, you don't see nowadays, but B, the flashiness that he had with the flicks that he had and the ranges that he had, and the way that he forced teams to like change the way they were approaching bomb sites, just because of how like he kind of defined that like close range like shotgun op style that a lot of people started emulating. Like Fallen even picked that up later, and that was kind of like an evolution on that.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the way he defined that role and changed the way that teams had to approach like certain engagements really made that a lot of fun to watch. And obviously, just in individual star power and highlights alone, you can't everybody remembers that era of Kenny S if you were around watching the game back then.
Oh yeah,
He surely had like a massive influence on how teams use utility.
Yeah,
especially flashes and mollies.
yeah. I mean, in many ways, he was kind of the Simple before Simple, and like insofar as he's the star player that everybody wants to be. Everybody, men want to be him, women want to be with, that shit. Like it's just straight up. That's Kenny S, right? Because like this guy just would rock up, and sometimes, I mean, from behind the scenes, sometimes without that much practice, and just absolutely start doming heads. It's ridiculous the kind of stuff he pulled, especially when you shade in the context of like what was happening behind the scenes and all the French stuff. It's like those rosters never. I mean, obviously, we never saw Shocks and Kenny S together and all this other stuff until like way later. But still, some of the most entertaining moments in like 2014 and stuff came from Kenny S. Right? Like it has to be said.
With Kenny S and how dynamic he was, it was really. I mean, like things that really stuck out to me when watching him were the fact that it was. It was pre-op nerf when this was happening, but the angle taking with the op, the way that he pushed the gun in ways like, I feel like the only other player that really stood out to me of this era that was so confident when moving forward with the op was JW.
Yeah.
But Kenny S's accuracy, and I'd say even just kind of like pure mechanics, like how tight he could peek the angle sometimes, how he'd even sometimes play it like its source and jump peek into an angle. He would, like the way he was taking space while opping was so creative, and it just had so much brazen confidence, where a lot of oppers, they're so much more static. They're going to like hope that someone walks into their crosshair. Like Kenny S never cared if he knew how a fight was about to break down, he didn't care if he was the one that was pushing into the fight or the one that was holding into the fight, because he was just like, it was just pure confidence flowing through him.
He knew
The way,
like,
yeah.
oh, sorry, I was gonna say like he knew like especially with like the movement speed at the time, like I feel like he really almost like broke them in terms of like, dude, I can just peek people with the op and I'm gonna kill them before they can kill me. Like he really like had a good grasp on that, like a lot more than like the other operas did at the time.
Yeah, that's why his mechanics really stood out. I will say that when he, even post-op nerf though, when looking at the way he would put together bomb site defenses and everything like that, he would play it like the player that actually reminds me the most today of Brokey, or of Kenny S, is Brokey when he's defending a bomb site. Like when he's playing behind a single piece of cover, Brokey can be so quick to just fire the op literally as quickly as it will let you fire. Like the fire rate on it, he's maxing it out. Kenny S was like the same thing, but Brokey he had that peak obviously last year where he was looking incredible, like when FaZe won the major and some of the tournaments before and after that, where he was just in incredible form. But Kenny S, to me, held that form for a longer stretch because he had it pre-op nerf and then he still had it post-op nerf, where he couldn't do the same peaks, but he could still put together the same kind of bomb site defenses where it's just like, kill a guy on one side of the box, peek the other side of the box, kill a guy. Like it was so fast and it felt like he was just pushing the gun to its limits, even when Valve was trying to like slow him down.
I think also, obviously, his op flicks and the way he would peek is what defines that. But he also did have a pretty insane deagle back then too. So it was like I don't know how many people remember that, but his rifling was quite good for an opper, and then his deagle as well was so insanely good that he would often still get kills, even on, like, he was one of the operators who, like, you didn't just need to put that in his hands. Unlike JDM.
There it is.
Yeah, there
it is.
There we go. There we go. There we go. Cross it off your bingo card. Yeah. All right, who's your number 2? Yeah.
Okay, so my number 2 is Nico. I think similar sense as to what Pernogo mentioned with Simple, is that if he wasn't on anyone's list, it would be shocking. Because, again, speaking of the Deagle, some of the most absurd highlights anyone's ever seen, some incredible aces, but also it's just Nico's consistency for how long he's been playing, the incredible style that he has that, like, no player can really fully emulate. It makes him incredibly fun to watch for such a long period of time that I really don't think there's any riflers that are anywhere close to being able to, like, even compete as a player to watch versus Nico. Like, you can go and watch him maintain this level across every era of the game, which is just, like, you can't compete against that, I think. And he also manages to have his insane one-taps, his insane controlled style. He can spray really well. All of it just makes it really fun to like, and also like the low sensitivity with which he plays just kind of like, it kind of hurts in a way to watch, because you're like, fuck, why can't I, like, why can nobody else do that? Why can't, like, there's always that element of like low sensitivity abuser, copy pasta. Like, I think that it's really hard to put any other rifler above Nico on the list of like favorite players to watch.
Yeah, the thing is with the longevity is that it's you just have, when you think of how consistent and how good he was, like, it was, I mean, Mausports is when he really was on everybody's radar, but even before then he was very good too. And like the fact, like, you bring up, like, you can't really look at any riflers that have been good at the beginning of the game till now, and that's just where it's so absurd with Nico, because he was literally good in 2013 also. Like, he was at the beginning of the game, he was the person that was standing out for that iNation team when they were playing, and he was just like clearly the best player on that team. And then once he started playing more and more international events with Mausports in 2015, like, I don't think there's any I'm even trying to think of it. Like, what riflers from 2015 are still even relevant today? Maybe Crims, but for a very different reason. Like, he's found ways, him and like Apex, for example, have found ways to extend their careers, and Kerrigan for that matter, by taking up different roles and, you know, giving up the star potential that, well, I would say Kerrigan didn't really have that then, but like, for Crims for that matter, like he really has taken a back seat on the current level of Fnatic, where Nico, Star Rifler then, Star Rifler now, just keeps up his mechanics to such a high level, and you just know every time you watch a series with Nico, maybe one map he'll put forward like 12 to 14 kills, but the other two maps he's gonna be close to, if not touching, a 20 bomb on both of them.
I went back and looked, and even in just from 2013, Nico dropping a fucking 30 bomb against Navi. So this dude's been killing it since I didn't even know he went that far back, like to 2013 as well, at like a star ladder lane. But yeah, just fucking unreal. That's 10 years of just dominating with a rifle. Like that's fucking crazy.
Yeah, he also used a secondary op.
Oh,
Still killed it on that. Also, the frag, the Who's Frag Is That series that I think Betway used to do. He was one of the players where like you would watch the POV and you could instantly know it was Nico. Like just the kind of things that he would go for. The like style that he has is so definitive that it's just you had no doubt who you were watching when it was Nico, and that's also like just kind of cool to have like that defined of a style.
Yes, that's what leads to cultural impact, having a defined style.
Okay, so for my third, since we've already talked about Simple, I did have a backup, and for me, I might get. I do wonder what the public opinion on this will be, but one of my favorite players to watch was actually Flusha, because he always had such an excellent read on the game. Make of that what you will.
Okay.
He sure did, yeah.
And I think
sure did.
He was kind of like Neo from the Matrix, seeing between the walls and stuff. Yeah.
But yeah, as someone who watched that Fnatic team kind of dominate for a long period when they just started watching the game, like that Fnatic team and their rise was like what I first witnessed as I started watching CSGO, and learning how to play the game by watching that team. Flusha was always like one of the main players you could look at and kind of get a sense of like you'd see the way he would like make different moves on the server, or like he would push certain positions, or he would like the way he like chose angles to watch. And that was like, for me, watching that that was kind of like how I adapted to like how to read the game. And back then that was like, I think Flusha had a lot of impact in that sense as well. And he like it is just really funny as well, just going back and watching like POVs of even like FPL clips. Like there's a Pasha clip, I think, where he gets deagled through a smoke from top, like he's in window and he gets deagled through a smoke and he's like, Flusha, cheater, of course. Shit like that's just always funny. But like it was the way that he would have such an impact on the server in terms of just like he was like not Cold Zero levels of Terminator, but it was like the way that he would always have a read on what you were doing made him just enjoyable to watch as a player who, like, as you tried to learn like what game sense was when it came to like taking fights instead of just like like back then, especially in terms of like how the game was played versus now.
Yeah, the thing about Flusha for me is, regardless of which side you come down on the cheating allegations, you absolutely can't deny it was interesting to watch. Like, you were glued to the screen to try to study this man's play either way, just so you could prove your own bias or your own thought process, either one. But on top of that, like, he also has some really memorable clips, even later in his career after all the cheating allegations went away or faded out. We still remember him playing on Train, that ridiculous Fnatic series that they won over FaZe in the grand finals. Yep. I think it was Katowice. So like that's a case where it's just like, how is this guy doing the same stuff that he's rolling back the years, so to speak, and having that consistency? I think. Yeah, absolutely is one of the things that makes him memorable. Is he didn't just have a spark, which admittedly was very bright back in 2014, 2015, but like he carried that through for a while. And the last couple of years when he was on Eyeballers and stuff, it wasn't the best. But up until that point, like this guy had a real sterling career, and it was really awesome to see. I mean, even the fact that he went down and tried to bring up another round of Swedish talent is commendable, particularly since, NIP's moved away from Swedish, Fanatics moved away from Swedish. Like, there's a case where to be made where, like, actually you need a veteran who's got great game sense, but maybe not the aim anymore, to be able to, impart like a winning mentality into these players and stuff. And, great to see him do that as like a pillar of the community, so to speak, or the pillar of his local scene. And so, yeah, beyond that, it's definitely a player that everybody was looking at. He had all eyes on him for a good couple of years there.
Just say with Flesha, when remembering so many of his moments, it's to me like the way he was choosing kind of his positioning, like more macro elements, I would say. It was very rarely ever like a Flesha highlight from him just tapping people out or having better aim than them. He's usually catching people because he's playing around utility better than them, or he's just flanking them flat out. Like, he's playing Counter-Strike. He's like the thinking man's version of Counter-Strike, whereas so many people are like trying to push it with what they can do mechanically. But I think that of all the people in the history of CSGO, I don't think that I can confidently say anybody was better with utility than Flesha on the fly. Like, maybe somebody memorizes some smokes or some shit like that, and maybe they have like this encyclopedic knowledge of them. But when it comes to just like throwing a good flash, a nade in a clutch, a molly that's gonna really like do exactly what you want it to do, Flesha was so on point with that stuff. And I think there was, for a very long time, he was the highest like average nade damage per was it per round or something like that. Like, I think a couple people might have passed that, but also we've been able to drop nades now, and I think that's where that stat can kind of probably be a disservice to Flesha, because if you have any people that are just kind of, if you're a team now that's first picking Inferno, and you're the banana player and your teammate's dropping you 4 grenades, at back towards CT spawn, yes, you're gonna get better nade stats than Flesha, but in terms of like that era, nobody was touching Flesha in terms of just pure utility damage. So yeah, beyond that, like it's just that
I don't quickly just on that note as well. Like nowadays, especially, a lot of people have like set grenade lineups, or like there's certain ways that you use grenades now that you never did back then. And Flesha kind of like, he didn't define it, he just was somebody who did it. Like, not many people even like, people bought grenades and then didn't use them effectively, and Flesha was one of the few who like did do it, and it wasn't something that you could go and like watch a demo of like you can now and see like how people use grenades like Inferno Banana. It was, Flesha just did it on the fly intuitively, and like always consistently did shit damage with it. And it was something that you couldn't really emulate because he did it in just like a very intuitive way.
Oh yeah, he'll be standing in some place you've never stood before to throw a nade, and just like, oh, I need this to go in this area. He solves the math equation in his head and he throws it. Like, it speaks to a deeper understanding of the like the mechanics of the game, but not in the mechanics of like shooting, right? It's like he understands how the nades work and stuff. And I always appreciated when players could do that, because that means that they can get themselves into and out of situations that they really have no business being in, right? Like, they absolutely should be dead to rights here. Oh, he's got a surprise nade that kills a wounded player, gives him a chance in a clutch, or isolates an area that, like, I've never seen that lineup before, but like neither is he. He's just doing it off a feel. So absolutely a worthy point to bring up about him that I think is nuanced. It's not something that you would see in the average player anymore. Like, the game's kind of more solved at this point when it comes to nades.
Yeah, if there were ever a player where I'd be like, 1-to-1, this guy could maybe potentially even make Primastralis better, if you could have somehow put Flesha in for Zipnix, it seems so ridiculous to even say that with the amount of clutches Zipnix had, but like, I feel like Flesha would have fit into that system just perfectly, and he would have arguably done a better job in some of the games in terms of just pure firepower than Zipnix.
I was actually thinking about that like 3 minutes ago. Like, if Flesha knew Danish and you put him into Astralis, like, that'd be fucking crazy.
It'd been sick. It would have been so sick. Ooh, yeah.
Those are my 3.
Those are your 3.
Okay. Who we got now? I think it's Mix. Mix. Who are your 3 favorite players to watch?
I know 2. I think for the third, I'm gonna put Automatic. I think there's gonna be NA bias here, obviously. Automatic to me is like the NA Coldzera of that era.
Business as usual.
Yeah, NA Coldzera. Yeah. Okay. All right. Go on.
Well, listen. So,
are you talking about his Valorant play too? Are you including that?
That never happened. All right. It's like 2016. I mean, I just thought it was like remarkable. Like, this guy, like, no one ever really thought he was like anything special in like his previous teams before he joined Cloud9, and people kind of like doubted like the pickup at the time when they did pick him up. But like, because I was like a super fucking, I mean I still am, but I was like just an NA fanboy at the time, right? Like, and NA didn't fucking win anything. That entire 2016, 2015, aside from like the summer C9, just getting shit on at every event, fucking sucked. And so Automatic comes in and he's playing like at a genuinely like elite level. Like feels like this guy just like wins all his gunfights, just plays like so smart. Just like fucking elevated that team to just like a crazy high, you know, to NA's like first international event win in Brazil, which is fucking fantastic to just go to Brazil and shit on SK in the finals. I was very happy at the time. But yeah, I mean, I was kind of debating Stewie or Automatic for that spot. I think they're both kind of like represent the very similar thing to me, but I just love watching Automatic play. He's just a very smart player. He's a very calculated player. I've never worked with him, but I know like he has an amazing work ethic and just really thinks a lot about the game and like the things that he's doing. And I really appreciate that. And I think you can see that in how he plays. And he hasn't been as good on EG. I feel like even especially like the recent roster, he's been like kind of worse than even he was before for whatever reason. But I feel like he came back to CS and he was still like pretty good. He's like the only good player on the roster. And even like playing against him, the few times that I did, I just really enjoy like seeing how he plays, and I think he's very methodical. I just really enjoy watching that. To go to the opposite end of the spectrum, I'd probably say JW, like number 2. And there's so many JW moments, especially in like 2014, 2015, that always stand out to me. But the one that always stood out to me the most was I think it was with the Dennis roster when they went on that crazy run, like winning like 6 events in a row. They're playing LG in the finals of one tournament. I don't remember which one it was. But there's a moment where JW, it's like 14-14. It's super late in the game. JW goes, it's on Inferno. JW goes to do the balcony peek into alt mid to like, you know, find a pick, kill someone like trying to run up. And his PC crashes like as he's making the peek, and they see him. They're like shooting. The round gets canceled because it had just started, right? But they saw him like try to do that peek. Like they saw that that was the play he was going for, and they obviously saw it. And so the round restarts, and JW goes back and does the exact same fucking thing he had just tried, gets a kill and gets away. And I was like, this guy is a fucking psycho. And I was like, that must have pissed him off much. Like late in the game, you saw this guy go for this peak, you're ready for it, and then he does it again, and he gets the kill and gets away. Like that's so fucking annoying.
Oh, JW tilted the fuck out of people. He must have, like, with all his ridiculous antics and the stuff that like that would never work, and then it does. You know, like what a good player to watch.
Like especially when he had the CZ in the back pocket in like 2014, that dude would just go for anything because he could just instantly pull that shit out and just kill anyone. So.
He was the first person to me that was pushing the limits of the op, actually. Like even 2012-13, like that's when I was like, oh, like when I would look back at a lot of that stuff, the only person playing that flashy with the op was JW.
I was gonna say that like Simple does a lot of absurd shit, but JW almost took it to another level past that back then. Like he does, like Simple does a lot of crazy things, but it's still kind of in a way that fits into the way teams currently play, and then with Simple's own flair. But JW just like broke the limits. Like that literally, like you can keep your statistics. I prefer the magic meme.
A friend gifted me an Op Asimov, and this is the friend I talked to CS the most about the time. And so the op I had for years was named Be the JW You Want to Be, because that's always just how I want to play with the op. Like I wanted to be J. Obviously, I'm not that. Like I couldn't be JW, but my teammates probably fucking hated me for it. Yeah. But I wanted to be like just doing the most dumb shit with the op and like getting away with it. It was so much fun to watch.
Well, there's like the thing where he like B-hopped up cat on Dust 2 as well, jumped onto Xbox, killed someone suicide like 5 seconds into the round, and then just B-hopped out mid. Yeah,
refused to elaborate. Left.
Imagine you're just like, what the fuck just happened? Like, what was that? Who does that?
Yeah.
And he's doing this in like live matches, you know? Like that's the type of shit someone does that in a scrim, and you're like, dude, fuck this team. Like, you're not taking this serious.
Yeah.
They would never do this in a match. This practice is useless. But this guy was just doing it like on LAN, like in grand finals.
Yeah.
There were moments I remember from like the 2013 time when it was the old Mirage before they did the whole reskin to make it look like Dust, where JW would run through a palace and what is now called Palace, and he would just fly out balcony and then just try to op the guy on a bomb site, just one-on-one duel him. And it was like, this is so stupid. Like this is, and he would get the kill though. He'd get the kill,
Of course.
and it was just like the way that he would push defaulting to just be like he's just gonna get into your face and take the fight, but do it with the op was something that again nobody else was doing, and it's just like led to it's like that sort of flair and style is just like why people like him and Kenny S are just etched into our brains. Like, we're like, it's just so game breaking when you do stuff like this.
He did stuff with the op back aggressively with the op back then that like Yakinder with the rifle doesn't do with like 4 flashes nowadays. You know, like, it's just
no, it's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I look at JW and I just see somebody who must like the reason why I immediately dialed in on the idea that he probably tilted his opponents to high heaven is just like imagine you like he's also famous for his knife shenanigans and like all this other stuff. He's a player who gets into the opponent's head or at least tries to, and that's the kind of thing that I really appreciate, right? Like, you know, you think of other players who have done that like Taz or whatever, and they do it just in the sense of like being really vocal. This guy was able to do it even if you weren't phased at all or you couldn't even hear the celebrations after the round or whatever. You would still just be sitting there like stewing in it if you just got, you know, knifed between the rib cage or whatever from this guy. Like it's just absolutely ridiculous. So that's the kind of shit that I will always remember, and I hope somebody carries that torch into CS2 because that kind of psychological warfare playstyle is like my shit. That's what I like.
Did you have one more? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, one. And then number 1, no surprise, I think, Elige. Definitely my number 1.
I thought OC, actually, but, you know.
Yeah, I thought it'd be Montu, personally, but... Okay.
Montu.
Yeah.
Throwback joke.
Jesus Christ. But yeah, Elige, no surprise. I mean, just complete fucking dominance for years. I've never seen... I feel like he's consistently been, at times for me, like the best rifler in the world, just in terms of like how consistently good he was, and while playing so aggressive all the time. Like, I feel like you see this guy, especially like playing Liquid or something, this guy never seems to like lose a straight one-on-one gunfight. Like if you have a one-on-one gunfight, like equal health, like equal positioning, with Elige, he's gonna win it every time. Like he just has like insane consistency with it. And I just always love like his worth ethic, like how he really like approached the game and like how he really like thought about it, and obviously he was very determined just to get better at it and improve in like any way possible, which is something that I feel like NA was often missing, especially when he was coming up. Just like that insane worth ethic and, you know, really putting a lot of thought into how to get better and how to play the game. And I just really thought it was interesting how he combined that with such like an aggressive play style and just really getting in people's faces, just insane consistency over the years. And yeah, just seeing like an NA rifler just dominating like that was just always a pleasure to see. And I just love watching him because, like I said, aggressive, never seemed to lose a gunfight. It's a very similar thing with NAF, which is why I think like having those two on the same team for so long was just fucking crazy. But yeah, Elige my number 1 for sure.
In terms of all-time space takers, Elige has got to be up there. The way he's able to like, it felt like he was one of the people to me that probably earlier than others just like made sure that every single part of his route when taking space was done optimally. It feels like, if I had to guess, like Elige probably like went through so much trial and error with all of like going up banana or even like taking space on like Mirage mid or taking it like towards Dust on Dust 2 also, where he was just like every peak was like calculated. And if you watched an Elige demo, you'd be like, oh, that's the best way to probably peak this. That's the best. Oh, you should jiggle that and then wide swing this. Like so many little things that he did consistently well that he almost was probably like he got into like autopilot mode for space taking, which is something where other people have to like so consistently like really engage their mechanics so carefully. But it was probably to him just like a routine, almost like when a chef puts together a meal that he's made 100 times. That's how he's carving up some space on the map.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I mean, he's just a mainstay within North American CS, and it definitely shouldn't be a surprise to see somebody like him on a list like this, right? It's like absolutely one of the players that gave NA hope, but also like, so you sort of to your point about Automatic earlier, Mix, where he like sort of burst onto the scene, started playing at a pretty high level with C9 and stuff. It's like, yeah, Elige could actually contend with the world's best in the rifle position. Like maybe he didn't go all the way and ascend to the highest ranks or whatever, but he absolutely could compete, and he gave his team a fighting chance. Where historically NA teams didn't really have that. So coming from a scene that was popular with the viewers but not actually super successful, and then helping to develop that team into, or that scene rather, into a winning scene, at least for a time. I mean, that's definitely somebody you have to watch out for, just because he's essentially like the NA Nico or something like that in terms of consistency with the rifle.
Yeah, I mean,
okay. Oh yeah, go.
I don't have much to add past what you guys said. I think like one of the only things I was gonna say was that like I feel like outside of the game, I feel like every time Elige talked about Counter-Strike, it was always like genuinely knowledgeable things that he would say, which I also appreciated. Like you can't say the same for most NA players who did interviews. Like there was some whack stuff that would come out of some players' mouths.
I still remember the Launders Semfis.
But Elige was not one of them as far as like actual like in-game stuff came.
Yeah. Okay. Tangent before Pronogo, you get into your three. And this could be a short one. I hope, or we'll see. Whatever. We'll see where it takes us. Elige versus Twist versus Stewie. I guess I'll just throw his name in the ring. NA. Who's the NA goat for you guys?
Still Elige to me.
Okay.
I don't know, man.
I think Twist took it, to be honest.
Yeah. Maybe this is revealing my picks too much, but Twist is on my top 3. So.
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? Okay, let's just get into it. Let's get into it. Okay,
well,
get into your 3.
I guess I'll lead with Twist. So the reason I picked Twist is because I knew, like, first of all, my top 3 would include like people like Simple, etc. But like they already were taken, right? So I actually had the thought that like we might have wanted to do the snake draft, but I came up with the idea too late, so it's all good. But so Twist is the NA GOAT for me, not just based on accomplishments, but based on the fact that he did it. Like, when you continue to win deeper into a game's lifespan, in theory, that's where like the competition is at its peak. That's where you're going to see the biggest sort of like, oh, this is really hard to do, right? And it's not to say that the big Liquid roster that won the first Grand Slam that Twist has, because yes, he has 2 fucking Grand Slams, guys, is like that is a setup where, okay, that NA team, that NA Liquid, right, from 2019 dominated everything, and Twist was a really big part of that, but all of the players were sort of firing on all cylinders in that sense. So maybe it's like easy to say like, oh, it's just like the team was the sum of their parts and all this other stuff. How much does each individual player work? But if you go back and watch his rifle play, his deagle play, and some of the eco buys and stuff, like this guy is legit, and he is one of the absolute like phenoms coming out of NA from a skill perspective. And that's a case where it's like, NA generally historically has had like problems with leadership and problems with maybe opping, but when it comes to like skilled riflers and pistol players, like they have some of the world's best. It's just you don't necessarily see them activate in the same way. So the fact that this guy was able to come up, and then he made the difficult decision, or maybe it wasn't so difficult, if you go by some of his interviews, to leave Liquid post Grand Slam and join a European squad, in this case in FaZe Clan, and like go across the pond, and now he sees and recognizes that it's a more Eurocentric game than it was before in a post-COVID world and all this other stuff. Like, he made the career choice for me that cemented him as somebody who was always going to be aspiring to greatness. He wins a major, he wins a Grand Slam. Like, the fact that this guy was able to do so much from an accomplishment standpoint while still playing pretty well, like maybe not his Liquid peak, but he's an indispensable part of the FaZe Clan roster that had all the success in the last year and last 2 years, is like, to me, that really speaks volumes about this guy's play and his legacy, I would say, as well. I mean, you don't really get players like this come around who can find success in 2 distinct teams. Admittedly, they were speaking English the whole time, so it's not like he had to learn a new language or anything, but the fact that he's going from a distinct scene of North America, finding all the success besides a major, and then going into, a team that he can be led by Kerrigan, and he's like fighting alongside Rops and Brokey, and, it's just one of those things that you wouldn't necessarily expect a North American player to be able to find that level of success abroad. The fact that he was able to do it while not actually just being carried, but like actually contributing pretty heavily, to me, is why he's the GOAT of North America. Even though he's currently a mercenary for Europeans, I still have to take him as the North American GOAT.
He's my NA GOAT. The double Grand Slam, and I think like when you think about some of the moments between Elige and Twist for me that kind of like push it towards one side or the other, I've actually found Twist to be more clutch. I think wins in some of the clutch arguments where what Elige does is really impressive with like aggressive space taking, but if I have a guy that's in like a bomb site hold situation, he needs to get 3 kills. I'm picking Twist over Elige, like prime versus prime actually. And for what he did with his career, I really actually in a lot of ways resonate with Twist because I too actually, I moved to Europe to chase this game in a way. Like I moved to the UK. I moved to London to like be closer to it, to make things easier for myself, to like so that when I had to work a slew of events and work like 180 days overseas, like a lot of my flights instead of being 9 hours were instead 1 hour.
Yeah.
So I get it, and it does help your performance out, and so that's why I really fuck with his story. But beyond that, I mean, people love to talk about Twist's aim, but it's like to me, what I like about it is that it's like it's very good at just kind of like predicting the next fight and then some micro corrections in taking that fight too, as opposed to like I'm not gonna like Xantares to me probably has the what if I'm grading aim as a whole concept, I think Xantares has the best aim of all time in Counter-Strike. But I will say like Twist made things the right blend of having good corrections, but also better predictive skills than Xantares. Like, so that's where it was very soothing to watch him play because it's like, man, you just set up every fight for yourself so perfectly in succession. It's just like it's as a right and the longer like the more I played CS to a higher level, the more I kind of got bored of opping because I was like, rifling is just like what men do. Men rifle. Like, and if you can be really good and consistent at doing that, and you make it look relatively easier for yourself, like I feel like the appreciating that has risen for me over time, and it's also why we don't see too many riflers that stick around for longer than 4 years in their prime. So yeah, Twist. I'm glad you brought up Twist because I don't know if people would put him normally in their top 3, but you so predicted we would pick some of the obvious names.
Yeah.
Twist versus Elige, cultural impact.
Cultural impact.
I think it's still Twist. Just think about his hair. Think about the
hair.
Fact that
the hair is good.
True.
I think
but the
Elige's
pick though.
Yeah, that's the thing. I was gonna bring up the Elige meme pick. I actually was gonna bring up the smiling pick on Reddit. I think that wins it for me. I think Elige did a lot for that. The thing is, for cultural impact, neither of them have a big brand outside of like them just playing the game. Like Elige is doing some stuff on YouTube. I admittedly don't watch much of it, but like it's too much like technical stuff. Like neither of them are like huge personalities that are like blowing up the space. I think Twist had some good interviews early on in his career though. That resonated with me. Like there was this interview where when Twist was still on TSM that I still remember where like they were like, you're such a skilled player, but you're playing drop on Cobble, where a lot of like usually the less skilled people do or whatever. And Twist just goes like, I like drop. It's a challenge. And I was just like, I was like, okay. I was like, okay. I fuck with that. Yeah, like you're right. It is really. It's probably the hardest spot to play on the map. So that's a cool way to see it. That you just want the hardest spot. But okay, yeah.
Yeah, the thing that gets me, I mean, shout out to is something that you can't really say for cultural impact because I don't think most people have seen it, but Twists did get a chewing gum sponsor for Liquid at the time or something, like specifically because he chews gum all the time. So it's like, that's the kind of shit that it's like, okay, well, I guess they capitalized on it. They saw that he had this habit or whatever, and they're like, fuck it, I think it was like 5 or Stride or some shit like that, but either way, it was funny. So, like, the thing about Twist for me, to close out that point about him specifically, and the whole, like, NA GOAT sub-discussion is, like, Elige didn't actually make a move until it was forced upon him, essentially, where then he goes to Complexity after, like, maybe fielding offers from Evil Geniuses, and that whole thing falls apart, and then he goes back to Complexity. It's like, that whole thing was a bit weird. Like, okay, whatever, get your bag, son. But when it comes to, like, Twists, not to say that he was turning down a bag, per se, but he went across to FaZe, and it's like, that is the harder choice. Remaining in NA is the easier choice, even if you don't get the same level of success. Going across to, an area where it's not really been proven, like actually being a bit of a trendsetter for the NA side of like being a mercenary for a team that's otherwise going to be made up of better parts than what you have back at your local scene, and like actually being able to compete with those guys, that is the harder thing to do for sure for me, and that's where it's like, I guess, Mauisnake was saying he fucks with the story. It's kind of a similar thing for me. It's like, you made the choice for your career that could have backfired way worse than just like staying at a lower tier NA team,
You guys summed up the points pretty well. The only thing I'm going to add is that you both mentioned the 2 Grand Slams, but not the major that he has over Elige as well. So
I said he won a
There's
major,
also
yeah,
that.
but yeah, that's true.
I don't give a fuck. I'm gonna leash some.
There it is.
Ride or die, motherfucker.
One last ride
he
with
gets
Lee.
0 argument.
Last I will say, Elige and Twist both have always given like very good interviews. I feel. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like whenever
Yeah.
either of them have an interview, like I actually want to listen to it.
Yeah, that's for sure.
except for when Twist was like, actually, I'm gonna op. I like opping. I want to op
Oh
now.
God.
Please.
Thank you. That would have been a dark timeline for his career. Please. I mean, actually, you know what was funny when he first joined FaZe and was hybriding on Train? He looked really good. But
Yeah, he was decent.
I think you look good. I think most people, their first tournament with the op, I've made this point before. Like every new opera that joins the scene, they're always going to have a really nice coming out tournament because nobody knows their tendencies, so they can't really game plan for them.
Mm-hmm.
But then you
Whereas
realize
in-
that like the player that teams always game plan the most for is the opper.
Yeah,
And
but
if you're the second opper and you're second opping consistently, you will start getting game plan for as well.
Yeah.
And then it
Mhm.
becomes a lot harder because teams are specifically like trying to single out your positions and just making life fucking hard.
yeah. Is that your first one?
Yeah, that was my first one. So I have a couple names that we haven't mentioned to wrap up my points. The first of these 2 remaining players to talk about is going to be Snacks. I feel like this guy
Love this
had
one.
a
Love that.
huge
Yes,
talk
yes.
about cultural impact, but just in
That is
general, like
such
this guy was a huge force on the server. The fact that
And out of the server.
oh yes,
The guy's
and out of the server.
fucking massive.
Yeah, and
So
he's,
unreasonable.
well, he's a real tall guy too. Like that's the thing. People
He's
might not
tall as
remember
fuck,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, he's like 6'6".
Dude, he
or
might be
something.
like 6'4", I
Yeah.
think, honestly. Like, I think he's one of the few people taller than James Bardoff at these
Okay.
things. And
Yeah.
James is like 6'3" or 6'2", so yeah.
What I
He's
still
at least
remember,
6'4".
I still remember the photo of him like, back in like the dark days of VP where they were subbing in a bunch of talent, and it was Snacks and I think Mihu, who's like
Yeah.
this like
Oh,
really
God.
short, like really
Oh,
stick
yeah.
thin player, and Snacks is just like bear hugging it. I'm like, are we about to see him like crush this guy? Like, what's going on? So like that's just like the that was like the Papa Bear and Little Bear, you know, moment right there where it's like, holy shit, like Snacks is a larger than life type of character, and that's the kind of thing is like you could tell that this guy was built different just by watching his play. I mean, obviously, funnily enough, he had a very sneaky style where he'd catch you off guard, which you wouldn't necessarily associate with his persona outside of the game. But like coming into a team of legends, right, and like building basically a new Golden Five with the VP roster, like that to me was something that put Poland back on the map for Counter-Strike, for Global Offensive specifically, but like the idea that they won on a home soil, obviously we all know about that from North America's Boston win, but like just in general, thinking about that as like one of the only times that that's ever happened. The fact that Snacks himself is like has so many memorable clips associated with him, and specifically could do it with so many different guns, right? Like the A1S clip, okay, that's, you know, walking into Snacks Wonderland. He's found his way around, like that's the sneaky one. But you think about the pistol clip, obviously, oh Guardian, bye bye, all the classic calls. Like this guy was basically like fodder for your taglines if you were a caster. Like this guy just like this guy just made like you just instantaneously started using like all the good ones. You had to come up with this stuff and game plan as a commentator around like this guy pulling off some ridiculous play. Like, all right, what am I gonna say? What am I gonna say? Like, I gotta have that.
Yeah.
Like, by the way, no matter what Sadicus says, he absolutely planned It's a Big Apple and Snacks is Hungry. Like, fuck off, dude. I know that wasn't off the top of your head. Anyway.
Just random shots there, but also I believe you. I'm on the same side of you there. Yeah.
I think one of the things that really defined Snacks back then was the way he played around and inside of smokes. He was like, especially on like, I remember so many iconic clips on Cash where he like sat in the smoke, pushed behind people and B main. It was just like, that was one of the biggest defining things for me. And also he had a lot of versatility. Like as we all know, that VP roster swapped roles and like changed up things like internally instead of making player changes back then. But like Snacks at some point IGL'd, at some point opt, at some point lurked. Like he is very versatile as a player, and he was usually pretty good at like every aspect, or not every aspect, but he usually like managed to make each of those work in their own way. Even though he wasn't necessarily like a specialist in any of the specific roles.
Snacks was the smoke criminal before Stewie.
Yes.
Mhm.
If anyone should have had that title, it should have probably been Snacks, actually. But what's crazy about Snacks too is that he doesn't like in so many ways to me, Snacks was very brainy, but also when he needed to, also incredibly mechanically talented. Like I almost think it's criminal that his best highlight ever is such a mechanically skilled clip where he does that, on ESL New York with the pistol
Yeah.
clutch. That is such a ridiculous highlight from him because like that's not even how I really remember his game.
No,
Like
no.
I don't remember
Yeah.
it's not about snappy aim. It's not about just like multi kills of just dueling people consecutively. It's usually about like you're saying playing around utility,
Yeah.
throwing a flash in somebody's face, then knifing them right in the chest like as they're blind still or recovering. Like he would bring the Zeus out at times with the flash. Like he had all these little just like huggy ass plays. And I think one thing that was funny in like when it comes to cultural impact is like that spot, because I talked about this with teammates actually. I remember we had this exact conversation maybe 6 years ago, was that you know how on Cash, when you exit B main, like straight right, that little one and done spot, people would call that corner Snacks. But then I
Yeah.
think some analysts or talent, I remember in a podcast in like 2018 or whatever, was like, they're like, someone didn't get why it was called Snacks. And I listened to that and I talked to teammates about it because it's like, but like the reason wasn't the analyst, I forgot who was saying. I think it was like an episode of Counterpoints was like, I never have even seen Snacks play that spot. It wasn't that he played that spot. It was that when he smoked off B main entrance, he would lurk into that spot as a T, and then when the smoke was fading, he would get a kill onto the B site player, or sometimes he would just creep out of the smoke on that corner edge. And it wasn't about actually sitting in Snacks looking for like one and done kills as a CT site defender. So like all these things in Snacks' history have kind of been in some ways lost. And if there were somebody to go through like a really deep dive, like who had a crazy interesting career and like break down so many of his iconic plays, Snacks has some of the most ridiculous highlights to this day.
Listen, Stewie gets the smoke criminal moniker because Snacks did it on LAN and in matches, and that's cool. That's whatever. Stewie did it in prime NA FPL, and that's just a level above.
Yeah.
Rank S times, yeah,
Yeah.
sure,
Some-
yeah. He
somebody
did it on
in-
stream.
He did it in real Counter Strike. All right.
Yeah.
Somebody in chat said that Snacks held shift so Stewie could hold W, and that fits,
Yeah.
honestly. It tracks.
Duality of
That's a
man
good
right
line.
there. Yeah.
That's a great line. Yeah.
Yeah, so glad we could get some Snacks love in anyway. My last player is Guardian, because this guy has had a career that has been criminally underserved. But if you go back and watch him, this man could hit shots so consistently, and he had a lot of really exciting, like people underrate Guardian's play for like clutches or anything like that. He had a really lot of surprising impact kills where if he doesn't hit the shot, like obviously everybody thinks about like the device style of opping, right? Where it's like you post up and then you shoot him as soon as you see him. And it's just consistency. It's accurate. It's not like simple. It's not explosive. For me, Guardian was like that kind of player, except the fact that he was so consistent with it and could also post up on so many different angles across all of the maps. I'm thinking Inferno, especially. That was a case for me for Guardian being this like really solid player that you would be excited for when his team had failed him previously in the game, and then you would go into these like round 30 situations or overtime situations. Like 100% of the time, this guy hits the shots. Like, it's just one of those things where I'll never forget Guardian specifically hitting all of the shots and making it so hard, for example, for that C9 Boston run to even happen. Like how many times he held them off kind of single-handedly. His rifle play wasn't that, I guess it wasn't sterling, but it was something that allowed him to be consistent on low buys, which obviously happened a lot more often in his like heyday when it comes to the economy. And even past that, I mean, there's the story that everybody already kind of knows, but it's worth repeating that this guy doesn't have like a regional scene. He had to learn essentially Russian so that he could speak with the Navi guys because he doesn't come from a country that actually has a lot of active players. So, and just another player, sort of like Nico from Notes List, that it's like, man, like this guy should have had a major surely. Like it was almost destined like for how good of a player he was. But at the end of the day, it just didn't end up happening. So the reason why Guardian's on this list for me and not Device is because of that tragic nature of his story, while also overcoming so many odds to even be a top opper in the first place and be one of the best players in the world back in, the Fnatic heyday, for example. Like that to me is why Guardian was so fun to watch and why I'm sad that I most likely won't be seeing him in the server for CS2, just based on the fact that he's been sort of out of commission for so long, right?
Yeah. Like, one thing I really loved about when I was watching Guardian demos earlier on too was that like the way he would also read the macro elements of like what the other team is doing. Like I felt like whenever I was watching a team that was maybe a cut beneath Navi when Guardian was playing for them and the other team tried to slow the game down, I was like, you're just playing into Guardian's
Yeah,
hands
yeah.
so easily here. Like he's gonna know what rotation or mid round you're gonna go for. He's gonna put himself in the right spot so he can get like one easy kill and then usually come up with a second multi-frag kill because you're just not gonna trade him perfectly. So yeah, like the skill aspect of Guardian 2 is something where I think it kind of to this day goes underrated where like that meme about like I remember a Guardian flick
Yeah.
thankfully has lasted, but
Yeah, yeah.
people don't really mention his name in like the super flashy operas even though he did have quite a bit of flair and could come up with like really crazy flicks all the time like he was quick scoping people
Oh, yeah.
at medium close range also like yeah, super fast and like I'm glad that like I mean, I'm not glad that it's unfortunate. In some ways, it's like it really, like the Astralis era did so much damage to so many people's legacies, and like
Yes.
if they weren't, if they didn't exist, like I'm pretty sure Guardian would have a major at this point too. Like it's just that Astralis had to take away so many from us for so long, and then the Cloud9 run obviously took the biggest chance for Guardian away from him too.
Yeah.
There was also well, kind of on a similar note is that I feel like he forced teams like when they did try and default, like you said, and they tried to play slow, he would just single-handedly rip them apart. Like to me, one of the most iconic places that come to mind is like Divider on Overpass. He was like unstoppable in that area, and then teams would try and like I almost feel like he's the player who forced teams to like start mollying the like Divider stairs area because he used to play around that so well that like you had to flush operas out of that spot, but he would still like he would sit in the molly and get another two.
Yeah.
So it's just the you're right that the meme with like the Guardian flick thing is I'm glad that it's lasted because he was in a similar vein to like JW and Kenny S in that sense that he was one of those operas who was just like almost unstoppable when he was in form. And it's sad that he won't be one of those players that we see in CS2 kind of continuing that trend.
Yes, it's almost like you could kind of conceptualize him as in between a highlight opera and a stable like device type opera, right? But like everybody
Yes.
seems to have forgotten the highlights, you know what I mean? And I think that's probably down to the fact that unfortunately, like Maui said, like he didn't win too many tournaments with his FaZe Clan run, and there was a couple mixed in there, but like Astralis. First it was SK, then it was Astralis, and it's just like this regional team domination. That was before we even saw that. It was a big question mark of whether international squads could win majors or big events even, it was, and then, Kerrigan slowly started to change that with FaZe Clan with the big events part, but never the major part until obviously, inevitably it did happen. So like, yeah, it feels like maybe if Guardian had held on long enough with his skill to remain at that, like at his peak level for just a couple more years or a single additional year, he could have maybe been in form to take another major, but we just never saw it happen. So that'll just be the biggest what if, or for me anyway.
Okay. You know what? This topic is so fun. Was anybody on like the tip of your list that you didn't include, but like you feel like you could go off about? Snacks would have been mine, so I'm glad we already covered
Okay,
it. But there's definitely like for enjoyment's sake, there's gotta be like let's get like one more. Surely you have Prodogo. I'm sure you have another one. I want to hear it.
Well, as far as enjoyment's sake, I would have to say I was torn about whether or not I'd throw any IGLs on this list because it's not really about watching their play as much as it is about watching their career over time. And for that way, like Kerrigan's story is super satisfying. And I actually feel like a sleeper pick for this, if you were going to include like IGLs in this role, I'd have to include Snappy as well, just because like these two players in particular have tried to put forth the idea that they can bring up talent or they can, take a roster of disparate pieces, especially an international one, and then sort of like pool them together. They have their own vision. They work with their coaches or whatever. In the case of Snappy, Kerrigan obviously didn't really have the same level. He might have had the leader of man thing with Robin, but he didn't really have the idea that, oh yeah, you got a tactical system to use. So I don't know. It feels like to me, looking at Kerrigan and Snappy, I'd have to at least throw them in the honorable mention of like these guys' careers were incredibly satisfying. And okay, it would have been more satisfying, I guess, for Snappy if he had won that last big tournament. But it's just one of those things where it didn't end up happening. So like I don't know. I just look at those guys and I think like they're not going to be underserved. I think they will be remembered as great IGL candidates and like top 3 or 5 or whatever, depending on which one you're talking about. But for all time, and it's just like. Yeah, I think it was quite satisfying watching them go through all the different rosters, all the different tribulations. Like when Snappy was about to join that, was it Tigers or something like that Asian team?
My God!
Like I remember somebody asked him about that. It might have been on Talking Counter or something, and he was like, "Yeah, I was just really tired of people saying that I can't put a team together. I can't be an IGL. So I'm just gonna make like the most ridiculous roster and then get it to like top 20 or something." And like that was his idea of like, yeah, I'm just gonna succeed with like the most ridiculous thing, and that will prove that I'm a good IGL. Like to have that gusto to be like, yeah, this is my shit. Like I'm gonna do this. Like it wasn't even a question in his mind apparently. Like he was just like, yeah, I'm gonna do this, and it's gonna be a challenge, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Like that kind of stuff is super satisfying.
Yeah, because the thing that was always holding Snappy back as like a slight was that he could bring up a team to say top 15 in the world. And I saw it a couple times to be fair. Like it wasn't an untrue narrative is that he could get players that were probably not even deserving of being top 15 status to that level, but then they would peter off. The style, like to me, it felt like the style would kind of run its course, and then some of the players would actually even go on to be better than what he actually brought them up to be. But then he just couldn't actually make a team. He could make a team from zero, from like literally unranked to top 15, but then making them top 15 to top 5 had always eluded him until this ENCE roster for me. Finally, he's proven that he can really, and maybe it was something that indicated growth though for him. Like I actually just never saw it happen. Well, it never happened before. He never won an S tier trophy before Dallas. So for him to put that one forward at a very, very like that window was about to close on him for CSGO, but he just figured out what that last piece of the recipe was in order to bring a team from unranked to top 15 and then make them from top 15 to a world contender. So
it was like 50 rounds on Ancient to decide it too versus FaZe. Everybody knows that was the real grand final of that event. Like, geez.
That was one of the best maps I've ever seen, honestly. Yeah, that was crazy. Okay. I think let's just get into it. So we'll Mix had a BRB really quickly, but I think we'll still just get into the next top. Actually, you know what? Yeah, let's just do it. So favorite single roster. Let's just open this topic up. So this is obviously it's the history of it, but like we're gonna have I think some pretty interesting ones. But just because you finish off the last one, Pronogo, you're gonna kick this one off for what is your favorite 5-man lineup of all time?
Okay, my favorite 5-man lineup. I had to think about this for a little bit because I was tempted to go for one of those like OG picks that kind of got me into the esport in general. I was thinking back to when I first really started actively watching before I went back and watched a bunch of stuff from like the older days. And like I was kind of debating doing that ridiculous Gambit lineup that won that one major just because like it was such a shock. But like you're thinking favorite of all time. And I'm going to go with a more recent pick. I'm going to go with the FaZe clan that won everything just about very recently and got their Grand Slam. And, that was obviously Kerrigan, Twists, Brokey, Rain, and Rops. To me, this roster exemplifies what you can do when everybody's on the same page. And it's so compelling to me because, again, going back to the international thing, it's like Kerrigan and Robin to some extent as well, obviously contributed really massively to the energy of this roster and them being able to win so much stuff. But also the way that they did it, it was challenging. Like it was not without tribulations. They absolutely dropped maps or maybe looked like they were on, the breaking point and somebody was going to supersede them. It was never one-sided and dominant like the Astralis era or even like some fragments of the SK, if you want to call their era a mini era or something. Like to me, the FaZe clan lineup that you saw, I mean, like it was so enigmatic how they were going to actually do the win, but you had faith in them doing it. Like you had faith in them pulling it out. And the fact that they would be, super tight games. Like you really got to see the evolution of these players and like the states of their careers. I know many people have commented already that like Kerrigan going down to a spot where it was like, overtime point basically on Inferno against Navi at Antwerp for their major win. And he's, this is the opening map, and you could almost see flashbacks of like, is he going to do the same choke that he did against Boston? But instead he like makes the call, go A instead, and like they just charge on in with pace. That kind of shit really shows the level of like where these players came from. The fact that you could see that history like embedded within the one match, and how now it's different, not just because you've got different players, but because you've grown as a leader, as a caller. To me, that really cemented like those kinds of moments anyway, cemented FaZe Clan as the favorite single roster for me, because it builds on so many historic elements. Right, we have Rops coming from Mouse Sports, obviously cheater allegations and all this stuff. We have Brokey, like this weird guy. Like there's not really any other way to say it. He's just weird. Like he says nothing when you ask him for interview questions. He just goes yes and then move on. And like I don't know, like that. But he has such a weird play style in game too, and yet he could come up clutch. Like it's hard to forget those kinds of things. And then, all obviously like Rain being the original Giga Chad, the fact that like, I mean, you want to talk cultural impact, this team has a lot of that, but like, I'm just looking at the whole roster in my head. Like, obviously we already waxed lyrical about twists. It's just, there's so much stuff here where it's like the way that they achieved great success and got the Grand Slam and got the major, they had to overcome all of their individual challenges. And so some people will throw flack at like, you picked a team that's pretty recent in terms of, history. But like, I think that actually makes it richer for me, because you get to see, if you were around for that time or you went back and looked at it from the past, you get to see how their histories have given them the sort of carte blanche to win here and be successful. And again, it wasn't even like even if you're just a Johnny come lately and you just watched that year, it was still exciting because you thought maybe they would lose at many different circumstances and different turns in the road, so to speak. And they zigged when they should have zagged, but no, they somehow managed to clutch out. And that shit's just crazy. Like even to see a little bit of vestigial form there in the Paris Major for them to get to playoffs, to overcome Navi in that ridiculous Anubis game, for example, like that stuff is like, that's the FaZe Clan I want to see. I don't want it to be easy. I want it to be like, how are you going to show me that you still have it in you? And they regularly did do that. So yeah, they've fallen off a little bit now, but for me, they're my favorite team.
Even speaking on like Brokey, right? For example, Brokey, obviously, like we said earlier, like Brokey's peak with the op especially. But like the really interesting thing about me with Brokey is that like when he first came into FaZe, he was really just like a young player that they put in to like fill like all the bitch spots. Like he was like lurking like all like I guess I call them like the B spots, like connector on overpass, like playing like B anchor on like most maps. Like he was just the guy that like he could just fill like those spots. He didn't mind playing them. He still performed like really well. And then over time, like his role like kind of shifted into more like taking up better spots and then eventually taking up opping. So the fact they were able to find like so much success, win a Grand Slam, win a major with like this young FPL player that joined and just like was just a rifler. Like he's just a good rifler. He's gonna fill all these spots for us. He's gonna do it really well. Kind of like an oboe almost, just in terms of like it was a very like premier player to have at that position. Someone that could still have like a lot of impact and really frag. And then for that guy to turn into an opper on like a world class team, I think it's just a really interesting thing.
Yeah, Brokey's story definitely is undertold because he undersells himself.
Yes,
like this is by his own doing that he definitely we don't give him enough credit because. Yeah, he's just the worst interviewee of all time. He might be the woat, honestly.
Dude just wants to play CS. Like he is like the definition of like I don't care about any of this shit. Like I'm just playing the game.
Can anybody here confirm or deny if before the grand final of the major he was actually up until 4 a.m. opening cases? Is that real or is that fake news? That seems like it's ridiculous.
I heard that. I heard that more was happening during Paris, not at Antwerp.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I heard that pre-RMR. Yeah. I don't know about like pre-major, but I did hear that.
Yeah,
about that.
I mean, to zoom out on the rest of that team though, I'm glad that they did get to go down in history as one of the greatest because like it's just so jam-packed with great narratives. The Kerrigan redemption arc from being seemingly the problem of that old TSM lineup to then coming back. And then having a big choke on the stage in Atlanta or in Boston, against Cloud9, and then to finally like regather the troops to play again with ROPS like he was on Mouse Sports 2019, and then show everybody like, no, he can win at the highest level. It's not a choking problem to win a Grand Slam. Like there's like what Kerrigan was able to accomplish with this lineup is what vaulted him into a conversation with Glaive as the GOAT in-game leaders. I think that's a very open discussion still, depending on what sort of rubric you want to bring to the table when grading them. So if it weren't for this lineup, it would be a closed and shut case that Glaive's the greatest in-game leader, but now actually it's pretty cool and more interesting. And for that reason, it's just brought up great discourse. And I think like what was also really cool with this lineup for me and where I had to eat crow on it is that I'd said in the ESL Pro League before they started winning events, I was like, Rain's just not a star anymore. He just doesn't have it in him. Like he's really kind of washed. He's been washed for like not washed, but like he's been just kind of in my eyes, he was like very average pro. In fact, sometimes you would even say lightly below average. Like the online era treated Rain horribly. Like he just didn't care. Obviously, he played it well beneath himself. And then for him to come back to become major MVP of Antwerp was like, okay, dude, like. So you got the motivation, and it kind of like painted this funny picture of Rain and FaZe, where it's like they're just a team that seems to get motivated by legacy points, and that's why winning to me was the triple crown of Major, Katowice, Cologne in the same year is so impressive. Where I don't think that any other team has ever done that, and so for in the same year, calendar year at least, actually. Did Fnatic do it in like 20? Actually, maybe I think Fnatic technically did it, but it was because Kato or Cologne that year were a major.
Yeah,
so it's like they accomplished it
Yeah.
by a formality as opposed to winning 3 distinct events. So they're so that was super cool. And then also it's like one of the reasons that we get to open up the NA GOAT conversation with Twist because he accomplished so much with this lineup too. So there's all these like really fascinating narratives that we're able to come to a great culmination with this lineup. So it's a good pick for your favorite 5-man roster. Mix, what's yours? What's your favorite 5-man?
And so I was gonna probably pick an NA roster, and actually the one I had on my mind was like the Optic 2016 one because I just really like that roster a lot. But the one I actually want to choose, it's a standard pick, but not a standard pick for me. After Note mentioned it, is Virtus Pro, obviously the original roster, and the main reason is like I wish more teams. Cause I feel like every team nowadays is like you have like 2 or 3 months of bad results, or like you maybe like stagnate at like top 10 or top 5, and it's like you have to make changes. Like you have to change your roster. You have to like change players. You can only be top 1. Like only going for top 1. That's the only acceptable level, and I don't really get that. I really like how VP over the years really like they changed their roles like so many times and just made it work in so many different ways, and I think that's really commendable. The fact that like they're able to do that from switching IGL, switching off, like you said, like Snacks was like opping, lurking, he was calling at times, and like all of these different variations had their own versions of success. And I really wish more teams would put more stock into like building something like that. You know what I mean? And like I feel like this like mentality, maybe it's amongst fans and as well. I mean, it is amongst fans as well, but like just in general, how it's like top 1 or bust. Like you have to be going for like a legacy defining Grand Slam fucking triple major winning roster, and that's like the only acceptable level. And I feel like for some regions and like some teams, like that's just not like realistic. Like I feel like if you have a consistent top 10 team, the team's good, you can have like success like changing things over time. Maybe you have a little bit of a down, but as long as you can show that like you can consistently come back to some degree, it's like I'm kind of glad that FaZe is really stuck with like their current roster. I just really enjoy teams that do that, and I really wish we had like more of that, like teams sticking together long term, just for the sake of like stories and like building brands and like really fans being really able to like connect with some of these rosters. Whereas like at the moment, it feels like most of it is just like, oh, you have like Ents and they're gonna change like these 2 EU players, like they're like top 5 for a bit. Oh, we're not winning like every event, so now we got to like change a player to like upgrade. You know what I mean? And it feels very like, I don't know how to describe it, like very unpersonal type thing. And I really wish there was more like connectivity, I guess you would say, and more long-term thinking and less like only top 1, like top 1 or bust. I wish like top 5, top 10 was like consistently acceptable. You know what I mean? And I really like VP for that reason.
I think 2 things I really liked about that roster. One would be that they played spoiler to so many teams back then, even if they weren't in title contention for the actual trophy. The number of teams who looked like they should win this event, and VP just came in and just like 1917 and like 1614 them and 2-0 the series, or like just one, or like, and it was always like very entertaining games too. It was never like games that just were a wash. And even in the situations where they lost, like that series versus SK, I think I think they lost. I think it was at Epicenter or something, or one of the events. But yeah, like in a lot of these situations where like they played some of the most exciting series that were just close, and it was always like in the semifinals or quarterfinals, and it always served for like a very entertaining game. And that made it really memorable because no matter like the personalities on the team were also very hard to dislike for one, but for two, they always made these games just fun. And they have some like you look at a lot of teams back then, you have players who like you have a lot of players who have like very distinct styles, but then you have this VP team with like personalities like Taz, like Pasha, but then you also have like inside of the game people who are just like Pasha is just such an enigma, for example. Like one of the worst movements for a pro player like you've seen to date. And it's just, but even then, like the team would still gel together and work, and it made it entertaining to watch. And I think like the some of the series they gave us back then were like to this day some of my favorite. The one like that map versus SK on Cobble stands out as one that I would go back and watch. So I think to me that it's a very good pick as well. It was definitely one on my list.
I just wish players would be more willing to like settle into, like a long-term roster like that and really like give something like that a go. Like I said, I'm glad that like FaZe at least a team that's really trying that and giving that kind of thing a go.
Yeah, the way that they just shifted roles around to try to just make it work was always, it felt like it led to so many fun conversations of like, oh, so Snacks is going to try IGLing now. Do we think his personality's fitted for that, suited for that? And then it's like, oh, this person's going to try opping now. Like, because of the way that they would always just keep trying to make it work, it did allow us to just still continue in terms of the continuity that team brought made it a lot easier to become a fan of them. And like in a lot of ways, I was rooting for them at big events just because like I respected the fact that they were trying to always tough things out as opposed to just looking for the easy fix of just picking up like a young up and comer or whatever. It made it so much easier to like them. Yeah, and the interviews that they gave were also just top notch all the time. So like they all pretty much everybody had. I'm gonna say like in terms of like the most personality, like Snacks and Pasha really were show stealers, and Taz also just gave really good interviews too. Like those three, like so many great moments in big playoff stages where it's like they just say the right thing to make you laugh or whatever. So, yeah, okay.
And even in stream clips with Pasha.
Oh yeah.
New Kingdom team, my friend, they have no chance to win 16-0.
It makes events just so much more fun when you have at least like one or two teams like that have been together for like a long time that are like fan favorites in that way.
Yeah.
It's just so much to like follow the event, see if like, this new like up and coming like team full of young stars is going to be able to get past them, that type of thing. It really adds like a lot to an event.
Mm-hmm. All right, Note, what's yours?
Okay. I thought of being very boring and saying Astralis, but actually, I would say for me, this actually was a toss-up, and I'm almost still undecided to this point. But just based on what we were talking about earlier with Cold Zero and Valen, I think mine has to be that SK team from 2015, 2016. Specifically the end of like 2015, but into their major winning run. But that was after Fnatic, that was like the team that I started watching that truly like I watched the game change around them and the way they played, and it showed me what Counter-Strike was and what it could be, and that made me fall in love with the game just based on like the way the storylines evolved with that team and the players that they had, the different roles that they had, and the way that they would never be counted out of a clutch situation. They consistently kind of like evolved. Fallen would put out all those videos where he would teach people to play the game, and I was like, oh, like this is actually like a genuine community thing as well. Like they're winning everything, but he's giving away like half the things they do on this map anyway, and that to me was really cool. And again, like we talked about earlier, like Cold Zero being the Terminator, Fur being this like sick aggressive player.
Yeah.
And then honestly, to me, one of the things I loved watching the two main things I loved was Fallen's like crazy aggressive, strange opping, like super shotgun op style. And also, I really liked watching FNX back then because he was like a player who like to this day is a bit of an enigma. Like he just comes in, wins 2 majors, leaves, like see you later. But he was just like a very oddly consistent rifler who like didn't really need to practice much from what all the interviews said. But yeah, I think that team was not just exciting to watch. They also won titles. They won 2 majors. They also were ones who like the way they were shaping the game around that time made it really exciting. And they were one of the teams that came to North America and kind of like helped elevate this region as well. So that also, like to their credit, they did kind of like help elevate a lot of North American teams back then because the practice environment definitely did get better. And in general, I respected that Fallen specifically was like teaching people to play the game at the same time as they were like winning majors. He's literally like, I remember he posted a video of like explaining like half of their Mirage CT setups. And he's like, yeah, like we'll normally play this close, like I'll be opping this close ramp thing and someone will hide in this corner. And then you watch their next game, they're literally running that like 6 times on their CT side. And it's like, okay, for it. So yeah, I think that for me was one of the like that was one of the teams that made me really fall in love with the game originally.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously they have had a number of PR nightmares since then that have definitely tarnished some of that legacy. But I think I still have to give them credit for that original for it.
Pretty legit team, though. I mean, you think about the different play styles that were on display there between like all the synergy Taco had with all the different star players. The fact that he was sort of like the right hand man to Fur and Cold, and the fact that Cold could do stuff that you would never expect. Fur would basically do the same thing, but like through the aggressive methodology. And then you had Fallen doing like stuff we had really not seen that much with the op, like sort of defining that while also being an IGL. I think that probably broke a lot of people's brains, if I'm honest. Like, how can you be a great like superlative opper or whatever while also being the IGL and like having all of these interesting tactics and doing what Note was saying, where you just sort of giving away the like, here it is, here's all my strats. It's like, how are you going to do all of that stuff at the same time, right? So absolutely, and coming from a region that hitherto had some legacy within Counter-Strike as a body, but not really that much impact in CSGO specifically, and doing it with essentially new players. Like, obviously Fallen was around back then, technically, but like in a different capacity, right? So like players that we hadn't really put on the map, from a region we hadn't really put on the map, being able to be so dominant, making the move to NA so that they could like try to get better practice, and then figuring out, actually, we still don't have great practice, so let's just do theory all the time. Like, that was a big talking point for me back in the day, is like, oh, these guys are just actually crunching down strats and like, you know, have a blackboard or whatever that they're writing on, and that's like a lot of their practice, so to speak, right? A lot of their prep. This is really cool.
Yeah, they kind of actually screwed over a lot of people in terms of you're totally right with the whole like the fact that they came from a region that was pretty much not on the map whatsoever, and with theory alone showed that you don't have to have great practice partners to still be a world-class team, because that just sets such a ridiculous precedent that like people, when they look so unfavorably at NA, hold that against them. Like, well, look at what LGSK did. Well, they're an outlier, okay? No one else can do that. No one else is doing that from a region that has no good practice partners. And yeah, they went on to be world champions, but like, you're trying to replicate something that's so ridiculously difficult to this day still. Like, one thing I'll say, like, and I have to say this, is like that lineup is probably is the most culturally impactful lineup of all time. Like, I don't think there is a single lineup that had more cultural impact, because it literally brought up a whole continent to play the game. You know, like that's it they put South America, obviously Brazil on top of that, on the map, where nobody else is really just took a whole region, strapped them onto their back, and said, yo, guys, we can make a burgeoning scene here. And to this day now, you would say that Europe is obviously the number one most competitive region, but you'd probably say South America is number two, because I think South America has passed North America. Maybe like in the last couple months that's changed because Fury is not looking good, but like for a good couple year stretch, South America was more competitive than NA. So yeah, what this team was able to accomplish, and the fact that all their personalities for the most part were pretty good on camera too. Like I like that you bring up FNX because he's the closest thing I think we have to like he's like a national celebrity in a way that's like there is TMZ level drama around him. Whereas when you look at some of the people like people like Pasha is a national celebrity in Poland, but like I mean, okay, he's an outlier too in terms of just like, yeah, he was on like a MMA type deal thing, but like it's rare for people to reach that level of stardom. But FNX actually was
FNX was on like some Brazilian dating show though.
Yeah, he's like on a Love Island equivalent, you know. This dude is screwing supermodels like every weekend if he wants to. It's so ridiculous, and he's a gamer, so we can all aspire.
It's crazy that they went from like basically unknown. I mean, not like obviously people knew who Fallen was for the most part. I mean, I didn't because I was like so new to Counter-Strike. But like for a lot of people, they went from like unknown to major winners within a year.
Yeah,
which is just like
Cold Zero specifically, right? Like he was only recently acquired back in the Luminosity days, I think.
Cold Zero was like it was like 6 months.
Yeah.
Probably a little bit more, like 8 months.
Yeah.
Like, we're like, who the fuck is this guy? So then, like, being the best in the world and winning a major, which is just like insanity. I will say, people probably have like this idea that like LG was in like their practice room for 12 hours a day, just on a whiteboard, just like theory crafting.
No, it was only 4 hours
every day.
Only 4 hours.
and they just never scrimmed, which, you know, I'm sure they scrimmed like a decent amount still. There were still teams in NA to scrim, but just not as good as Europe.
Well, they could only be scribbling on the whiteboard while FNX wasn't at the club, so limited time.
Yeah.
9 o'clock, they gotta pack it up.
You know, honestly, the fact that Immortals almost got that major dub after that whole SK stuff and like no FNX, no major was almost true. Like, holy shit. I mean, technically it was true because they didn't have FNX, so they didn't win the major, but he was on another team and they didn't win the major either. That almost came true, and that was like, that would have been meme magic. I mean, it would have been outrageous because they were out partying before the grand final of a major, making kind of a mockery of the sport, but it would have been ridiculous if they had done that. So that's another Krakow story there.
So many people on this team have like such weird like aftermaths to this lineup too.
Yeah.
Like Fallen's kind of revolving doors of just like him walking in a team, taking a huge ass salary, and then just walking away from it unscathed pretty much. When it's like, the results weren't even good.
Fallen walks in, plus 500,000 fans, massive salary. Fallen walks out, minus 500,000 fans, back to irrelevancy.
Yeah.
I think Imperial sold like $3 million worth of jerseys or something. There's there's like, you can look it up. I don't know the exact figure, but you can look it up. They sold like some insane number of jerseys when they signed Fallen in like the week after they signed him or something.
That actually has to be probably the most ever sold, like for a single player signing. Like I would not. I mean, I would be shocked if it's. I would be not shocked if it's all of CSGO. I feel like who else could even do that? Like a faker type person.
Fallen store sold more than $830,000 in Imperial jerseys.
I would honestly,
in what? How long? Like a week?
I would be shocked if anyone in esports has more jerseys sold than Fallen.
Yeah.
Just the size of Brazil and the size
and the fact that like
days.
they're one of the only reasons I think is like so dedicated enough that they will buy an esports jersey. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, and they're
like,
also so
attached. One's name on the back.
Yeah, they're so attached to a specific player too. It's not just like, you know. I mean, technically they support all of Brazil or whatever, but like that's just crazy.
It was in the 14 months he was in Imperial. Oh, okay, so it was 5.7 million Brazilian reals.
Wow.
So it was like in the 14 months, it was like a couple or $800 and something thousand. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's. I mean, what's funny is that it's entirely believable that it's more.
Yeah.
Like if you told me it was $3 million worth or whatever, I was like, that makes sense too. Yeah. Okay. I'll go to mine. My first one is like kind of memery, but it's kind of just like I love the story of it for it so much. And you actually brought it up, Renogo.
Oh, okay.
Is actually that Gambit roster that ended up winning the major. Yeah. That was the first team that I really found myself because I was into CS:GO obviously before it, but I never really was like, I want to pick this team to be my team.
I see.
And so as soon as really that lineup formed and the whole Zeus story of him
Oh
getting
god.
booted from Navi, coming to Gambit, trying to have this redemption arc for himself with these kind of like second-rate players, more or less. I mean, Doja and Adren were both like very well respected, and Doja was like a top 20 player before. Adren definitely hit top 20 at some point in time. Also, like they were both good, but then the other people that were around them, like I think when they started the team, was it like Waylander or something actually? But it was when they had Hobbit and Mo, Adren, Doja, Zeus. That for me was the 5-man lineup where I found myself liking them the most. I really, really just enjoyed the way that Zeus was able to find and succeed in that redemption arc. It just almost wrote to me like a fairy tale story. Like it's very rare in sports that you just get this guy that's banished from his team, has to like prove himself once again, and then can achieve that goal. What happened after that with Zeus just like basically like leaving Gambit out to dry and then just kind of like going back, slinking back to Navi is kind of like where the story runs. Like,
Kind of a weird script.
I wish it just ended. I wish he just retired or something like that. It would have been better, but like it would have had the fairy tale ending. But instead, he has to have these like basically dragging Simple down with him for years after that. But in terms of that actual 5-man lineup, yeah, I really, really appreciated them. I appreciated the style that they played too. That's one big thing for me where I really did enjoy the way that they would really wind down the clock, really make the opponents guess a lot of the time. And in high pressure late round moments with 15 seconds left, they do an exec and then they just bust into the bomb site plant with literally 0.4 seconds remaining on the timer. Like it was so entertaining. And also I really liked how they constructed CT side defenses too. It's just that the way that they would fight on CT side was so funny too, because it's like their intuition with timings was so strong that if you watch back some of the ways that they were winning rounds, it was like so frequently the other team would be sitting right outside their bomb site, like let's just say it's Inferno, like sitting at top car, and then right when the other team is about to pull all their nades out and flash to do an exec into the B bomb site, Adren would just like get flashed forward, just multi-frag a couple of them, and then just dip back into the bomb site with barely any time left.
Menace.
Yeah, he was so frustrating to watch.
Actually, like forget how good he was, like especially during that roster. Like he was insanely. He's like top 5 in the world easily.
When I was watching Adren demos at this time, I started crouch swinging spraying so much more. Like I started really like using that in my game, and I was like, oh yeah, you're just like impossible to hit when you do this shit. It's really like you're gonna survive longer. And I started like, I think at this time I just started keying into it more, that I started seeing other pros try to crouch slide into fights a lot more. And I realized like some people just don't have the aim for it, because it's a very specific mechanical skill set to like crouch slide and crosshair correct, because you have to like aim. Usually you're trying to isolate variables for aiming, where you're trying to like either make it either only a horizontal like adjustment in your aim, but when you crouch slide spray like Adren was at that time, you have to like diagonally move your hand upwards to like track the corner of the wall. And that's why also for your opponents it was so hard for them to hit him, and why I sometimes felt like how is Adren getting a second kill here? But it's just because the first guy missed his whole spray, and then Adren just transferred the second guy too. So, yeah, someone brings up like Tarek did the crouch slide spray also, but like Adren was way better. Adren was way better as a player. Like let's be honest, in terms of individual peaks, Adren kicks Tarek's ass. Like it's not even close for me either. Like sure, Tarek has a major MVP also, but like come on, like Adren did it in more than just one tournament. So I'm going to give it to him. I think also that team in terms of personality was like the right blend for me. Zeus was the loud, outspoken leader. Doja was just so unintentionally funny all the time. Adren was fairly quiet, but he actually could speak English decently. Mo never said anything. I don't know a single quote from Mo in the history of his career.
No.
But
he's never said anything, honestly.
And then with Hobbit, he was like quiet. And now what's funny is that he kind of became the outspoken guy for the current Cloud9, but I mean, that's irrelevant in terms of where this conversation is. Like, I mean, really though, like there were so many moments in their run too that were interesting, like Mo decimating Device on Overpass when they were making their PGL Krakow major run, where it's just like, why did Mo just destroy Device in an op duel, like for an entire map? Like shit like that would just happen, and it felt so goofy, and I just felt like again, it just like felt like no team ever felt more destined to win to me than them. Like when I picked them, I was like, this team's gonna do it one day, and I don't know why, but it's gonna happen. And then we find out that the real secret is that they all had 140 hours in the past 2 weeks before that major started. So it's honestly,
like
if you put that much time in, you get it.
If like the Vice playing that match, you're getting shit on by Mo. You're just like, it's like the quarterfinals of a major. You're just wondering where this guy got all this fucking confidence from. Like,
Yeah.
like who is this
Beating
guy?
him on every angle. He was beating him on angles that were like device advantage too. I remember
Yeah.
it was like, this is so stupid, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's just crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So you got you said it was your first one. Is your real one coming up, or is that actually it?
No, so I think it's just like for the sake of recapping this game and doing it justice,
okay.
I feel like we should just talk about the Astralis
Sure.
5-man lineup
Yeah.
because I know nobody would want to bring it up, but I think it has to be addressed. The fact that this team changed Counter-Strike forever.
Dude,
Yeah.
there was this TikToker that's like super popular, right? And so he'll just make like random like funny videos. And so like one of them he made was just like about esports documentaries, and he was like quoting like how an esports documentary sounds, and he was like doing like the fist bumps, and he's like Copenhagen 3 times, Legends 2 times, just like how an esports and like all the comments were like, okay, but like Prime Astralis was like actually we're like everyone was mentioning Prime Astralis in this like random like mainstream TikTok, and I was like, that's actually like crazy. Just like anyone who like I think anyone who like I think has even like vaguely watched or like knows CSGO esports probably does know like how fucking good Astralis was and how dominant they were. They literally are like the equivalent of like the New England Patriots, you know, in the NFL, or you know whatever else and whatever other sport, the fucking Warriors in basketball, right? Just that type of shit, like just unreal dominance, unreal chemistry. And I think my favorite part about it shows that like how unpredictable these things can be because it stemmed from a roster move that they didn't even want to make. You know, like that's, and I think that's something that it's not over.
You mean
like
getting
most,
Magisk?
yeah, getting Magisk. Yeah, how they didn't
Yeah.
even want to like get rid of Kirby.
Yeah.
Like how, you know, those types of things can just randomly play out in your favor. Something that you didn't even necessarily want to happen, which is just like a last minute thing. I think that's that kind of stuff is just super interesting.
Well,
I would say like what Astralis in retrospect did for me or does for me is that in like for example, like when we were watching the online era, and even I would say recently, like especially like what happened at the Blast and Rio Majors, the Counter-Strike can start to feel a little bit random, where it just feels like on any given day, some tier 3 team can beat a tier 1 team just because like they're just hitting their shots or like they're playing a really high variance style. But Astralis was so consistent at making the game feel like you can solve it if you have the right pieces that all buy into a particular team structure, which they themselves pioneered. So the fact that like every single person on the team understood losing conditions at every second in a round and did whatever they could to minimize those so that they wouldn't just like lose a 4v2. Like it felt like the one thing when people sometimes like ask me like in chat or whatever, it's like, what made Astralis so good? It's like you're never clutching against Astralis. You're like, if you're in a 1v3, they're winning it every time because they just understand how to play off of each other better than anybody did. Their chemistry was just so good. And even to this day, I would really love to see this Astralis team in a time machine playing against some of the best clutchers in the world today, because it's like I feel like they just are undefeatable. Like you can't, how are you supposed to break this crossfire? Like they just aren't gonna fuck it up. They're not gonna, like so many teams to this day, like why I still like really hate watching this FaZe team today is that they're like, they have a 3v1 advantage and they'll just peak. And I'm just like, what is a decade, 2 decades of Counter-Strike told us? The only way you lose is by peaking. Like, and Astralis just didn't peak. And it was so frustrating to watch, and why I would never say they were my favorite roster, but I felt like we had to include them because it's like, no, yeah, you're just following the book. You're following the textbook of what you're supposed to do and not do in these moments.
I think it's not only did they not peak, it was just in every situation they almost always made the optimal move or didn't do the unoptimal thing almost as crucially. Like there's points where, like, I was watching the 14-15 Astralis versus Fnatic Inferno execute yesterday for something else I'm writing, and obviously the utility is like a masterclass, but even after Glaive gets the 2 entries onto site and he's running like towards new box, he looks back at the CT smoke And I feel like because he got 2 sick entries, a lot of other players would just start spraying through that smoke trying to get like somebody else. But he is on like 45 HP, and he's just like, he looks at it, and you can tell like he almost thinks about it for a second, and he just turns around, goes to new box, and sits there for the rest of the round. And it's just like the small things like that are things that team did so exceptionally well. And then they had a crossfire going for the rest of the round, and then they just closed it out and went to OT and won. So it's like, it's not just the fact that they had the optimal crossfires and played it to such perfection. It's that even the micro decisions like that, where they chose not to like do something, not spray through a smoke, or not use a grenade in this situation and save it for something very specific. Those kind of things are really what put them above the level of like basically every team before them and since.
My biggest pet peeve in Counter-Strike from being on teams is players spamming 30 bullets into a fucking smoke, getting shot back through their tracers, and then just being like, I got spammed, bro. Like, dude, you just told them where you were for like 10 seconds, and then you're shocked that you died. Fuck off. But Astralis always struck like the perfect balance of like establishing what they want to do and like establishing their own game versus like not taking it too far and like just doing things that just don't make sense and aren't optimal at all. They had like the perfect balance of everything, and it just made them just feel just so unstoppable.
No, yeah, that's the thing about Astralis for me, is that they basically revolutionized both sides of the game, but in distinct ways, where their crossfires and their utility holding was allowing CT sides to just feel impenetrable. Like you could not really break into the site. You would just lose too many players. And then on the T side, as Note was elucidating earlier, it's like, yeah, you absolutely have to watch out for all of the different executes that they have and the little flourishes that they'll change, like this one spot where a molly goes instead of mollying, first oranges or second oranges or whatever. Like they'll do something different, or they'll like map it to their opponents and stuff. Like definitely anti-stratting was a big part of this team's success. And it's just like they had all of the tools necessary and they knew exactly how to apply them. And that was like, it's like in some ways when you break it down like that, it sounds really simple, but that's kind of the Astralis textbook. Like Maui said that they were following the textbook. I mean, in some ways they were writing it too while they were going, but it was still the textbook. Like anybody could try to replicate that. And obviously they wouldn't have as much success as Astralis, but it would, and that's actually one of the reasons why I think, like a bit of a side tangent, but that Liquid lineup that had, Steel, Brazilian Steel, and then eventually Taco with Peacemaker as the coach, like they couldn't actually break these guys whatsoever. And the reason is they were kind of playing similar Counter-Strike, following in the footsteps, but like again, the Astralis wrote the book on that, so you're not going to catch them off guard with their own style, right? And that's what made them so powerful, is they kind of solved it or optimized it in a way where the only real fighting chance you had against them was if you had, like, I'm thinking of like Furia breaking their nuke streak or whatever, is like stuff like that. It's like that's what you had to do, is you had to throw that something super unorthodox and also kind of wait for them to fall off a little bit, because like that was way later in their careers, right? But it's like, it's just crazy stuff. The rise, the holding, and then the fall. And I mean, it's worth pointing out too that they kind of like bounced back at some point. They were still a lethal team later on in their lifespan. It's just absolutely like the greatest team of Counter-Strike. I think it's not really debatable.
I remember preparing for them because I always knew Glaive was like super aggro, right? Mm-hmm. This is like my favorite part about Astralis, is that like the first time I actually prepared to play Astralis, I like actually noticed how much of a fucking psycho Glaive was. And it's like he's known as like this mastermind IGL. Astralis is like the textbook definition of like structured CS, and yet their IGL is just like holding W half the time. And it was just like the funniest thing to see. He'll just like kill a guy Ivy, and he's like, "Fuck it, dude, I'm just gonna run through Ivy." Like they just had like the perfect balance of everything, and I think it actually worked better because their IGL was the one that would like, for the most part, him and Dupree were kind of like the two guys that were mainly doing like the kind of crazy shit. But I think Glaive was actually crazier than Dupree even was.
I think also if we go back to what we were talking about earlier with Flesha and the way he like intuitively used grenades, Astralis redefined the way people used grenades. Not specifically like the other utility, but just grenades alone, especially on CT side, bringing so many players down to like one shot, headshot, M4 range, or just like entirely eliminating positions. Like half the way people play Inferno to this day is just because of them and how they took banana control. So it's like the way that they redefined every element like still remains a huge part of the game, and will even going into CS2. Like they are the ones who like set up the meta in a way that, like, even if it will evolve and change, there's so many elements of what they did that people will keep doing. And also, they during their peak, they were a team where you could look at each one of their players and they were the best in their role, more or less. Like almost every single one of their players at that point.
I actually want to bring up that as a discussion because I've seen that sort of idea floated around by like, is Astralis and what they were. Do you got like? It's kind of like the core of the question here is that more or less, were Astralis elevated because of that these players were the best in their roles, or was it a system thing that really elevated them to their consistent heights?
Well, yeah,
I
so
think the system helped make them the best in their role. I like the two are hand in hand almost to me. Like I think if you put any of them in isolation, they wouldn't be the best in their role. But it was the fact that the way the system worked to like bring out the best in each of them, and the fact that they all bought into it at the same degree. I think that was what made the difference.
This is a kind of question that you needed the last couple of years to answer because the team split up, and obviously the org is like a fucking shitbag org. But whatever, like the fact is, like everybody went their scattering, right? They went their separate ways. We saw Zonic win a major, but not using his system. Can you really still say, like, obviously in terms of accomplishments, he's the greatest coach, but like he clearly had to do something different, and in the end had to give control up as a coach in order to win that major, it seems. And so like that's already a big question mark. Obviously the two Danes that he brought with him in Magus and Dupree are like, well, Dupree immediately gets removed from the roster after that, and was deserved. I think everybody kind of realizes that, like, okay, on the people side it kind of sucks. To Mix's point earlier about it being impersonal, it kind of sucks, but like the having to change lineups or whatever to win, I guess people kind of understand that. And then Magus himself went through a bit of a weird sort of lull after Astralis as well. Like, obviously, Device had the whole NIP fiasco sort of period where there's a lot of shit going on in his. He's returned to form since, but there's a lot of shit was going on in his life. He wasn't able to play up to par. And Glaive is just out. Like, he's in the wilderness again. He's out. He's a dad now. Probably not interested in playing at the top level anymore. Maybe not even capable. We're not sure. And that's like. And rest in peace Zippix as well. But when you look through the whole roster, it's like really interesting to see where they went. There's not really any of them other than Device that is still performing to something that's comparable to their old level with the heyday of this team, which to me I think underlines Device's greatness, but it actually kind of makes the question more confusing because now you don't know, was Zonic the greatest coach? Was it like all Glaive or something? Because like they both kind of were mediocre for a while after compared to what their level, obviously what they achieved together. Separately, they were both not really that solid. And then Zonic wins a major, but again, not really using his system. So it's like, what's really going on here? Like, it does feel like they caught lightning in a bottle, and they worked so well together. And to Mix's point too about the fact that they removed Kirby not because they wanted to, but because he went to North, which is hilarious. And then Mega steps in, and that could have been Config, but Config had a poor like Twitter reaction or something to something, and like they were like, all right, get this guy out of here. Somebody else come in. Like the sort of all of the different turns there could have gone so differently for this team. And like if they had kept Kirby, probably don't win, all the majors, right? If they get Config instead, who knows what happens? Maybe they win more, or maybe they like that roster explodes or something. Like there's so many interesting things for the what if, but really the last couple of years have not really made it more clear as to like who was individually responsible for success. Like Device is still good. Everybody else is like a big question mark for me. Like, I guess they were just really that good because of what Note says with the system.
I fully believe like the system helped most of them elevate to well above what they normally would have been. Like to me, the only individuals that I feel like were really, really sick and could have been on any team were Magisk and Device. I thought Dupree was like very, very strong in the system. Probably had, if I had to pick the third most likely to succeed somewhere else, it would have been Dupree, but I wouldn't have actually, like without being in Astralis, I don't know if Dupree, for example, makes HLTV top 20, whereas Magisk and Device, I would imagine that they would make HLTV top 20 on any serviceable tier 1 team. Like they were just that good. And obviously, like there's no reason Glaive should have been HLTV top 20 or Zipnik. Or did Zipnix even get actually?
I feel like he did. I feel like all of that team was on there.
What? Yeah, well, either way, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think that the other three would have done as well. But okay, let's move on to our favorite series. I'm gonna go just so it's not as repetitive. I'm not gonna just start with the other end of this
Just
snake.
leave me last because I've got the most hipster pick of all time. So
Okay. Okay. Actually, I want to hear notes. I want to hear notes series. What's your favorite
Alright.
series note?
Mine, I have a feeling that Clone will be popular, the Navi G2 or the Navi Phase 1, but I think my favorite was honestly to this day still the Astralis VP E-League Major. That grand final was just the way it culminated, the way Astralis was playing back then. Again, like I said earlier, with VP often playing spoiler to teams historically, and the way that lineup just played together. I think that combo as a series was just so perfect in storylines between like the fact that VP had historically played spoilers, so everyone knew that they could do it, could have been their second major. Then you had Astralis like just dominating everybody, and then there's just this perfect mesh. The train match going to the end, Glaive winning with the outside rush calls. Yeah, I think it almost in that regard speaks for itself. If you look at, especially if you look at every series before, I want to say like 2021, I think that's probably number one on almost everyone's list. Maybe like not the Cloud9 fans as you get to the Boston major, but I think for me that's definitely like number one on my list. And then as we move towards the end, I think there's definitely ones that come up as candidates with how good the game got and the kind of starter players that we had towards the end here. But if you include a bit of the nostalgia factor and the way the game was back then, I think that's definitely number one on my list.
Yeah, that one ushered in the Danish era in a lot of ways, even though they obviously swapped out Kirby, as we've already discussed in length. But the way that the Glaive calling was phenomenal in this one. The fact that like in an era where you're practically winning like 5 rounds on T side train a lot of the time to win with 10 is just absurd, because you look at that first half and it's like like you're like, oh, this shit's out, like VP's gonna win the major. You're like, and then it completely turns on its head because of a string of good calls, great moments from the Astralis players. This one, definitely one of the games I remember when I was watching this one live that I was very much like ready to celebrate VP winning another major. I was very ready to like, crown somebody else to be major MVP in my own head, and then it just completely, like, it was such a brilliant comeback, and for so many reasons, like this one, it really deserves such a high positioning in history just because of like all of the narratives that were either born from this or like just wrapped up into this one too. Okay, I'll take one because it still involves VP. It involves VP also. You actually mentioned this earlier, Note. I was kind of hoping you weren't going to pick this, but it's the SK VP
Yes.
BO5 Grand Finals at Epicenter 2017. This was a game for me that, in a lot of ways, like as I was kind of moving up into the space as like trying to find my footing in terms of like what it was that I wanted to do, or like it kind of in a way solidified like, oh, I could 100% watch Counter-Strike for a living. Like I could literally I could watch this game forever and ever and ever, because this game just also had so many great moments. So it was a BO5, it went to double OT on the final map of Cobble, and I remember very specifically thinking about why VP were losing their grasp on the game. And it's a concept that I still see to this day, where in big, high-pressure moments, Heroic's the worst at this of all time, is that in big moments, they just kind of, like, play default, and they stop really, like, showing that edge and, like, that extra little, like, playmaking ability. Because there were all these moments at the end of that Cobble series where it was like, oh, someone on SK is gonna, like, make a play around a smoke, or they're gonna actually, like, go for a push and try to, like, seize the game as much as they can. But also another thing that was so great about this series is not just that it was map 5 double OT, it's that to me map 3 was also one of the crowning moments of this series, where SK were down 12-3 and moving into the CT side, and they make this monster comeback, bring the game to OT, and in OT they have two moments where Bolt and Fallen both win their own individual clutches. Fallen winning a 1v2 to win the game outright, where he had to hit a guy, I think with an op, as he was defusing on the B bombs. Like, one of the VP players was defusing in a smoke on B, and I think if Fallen missed like one more shot, the game's over. Like, the game's over. VP win, or not, or no, not over, but they would have had more rounds to play. And then Fallen hits the second op shot through a smoke to kill the diffuser, and it was like, bro, that was just such an intense moment. Bolts, I think, also had a 1v2 in overtime also. Snacks had like a 1v2 to even win one of the couple T-side rounds that VP needed to even send this game to OT when they were collapsing on their own T-side. So many things that were just packed into it, and like it just was one of the only series where you could, for me, like, it was so visible, the nerves actually getting to VP and them crumbling under the pressure, whereas SK elevated their performance in those big moments. So just the visceral reaction for me was so strong in the moment, and watching it back to this day, I can still see how that stuff came to play.
It was also just an incredibly exciting game of Counter-Strike, like, just full stop. Like, even if you go to the match page right now, and you look at the highlights section, it takes up more than a full page of your screen. And it's a best of 5, yes, but like the number of individual moments in that series that like you're mentioning just had tension and had stuff coming down to the wire made it so memorable as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This series to me was like real. This is kind of when you see VP was already on their way out, and the fact that they almost took this series to me was kind of like, oh shit, they can still do this, right? And so it was really exciting from that standpoint. But also to see like a best of 5 that had OTs in it, and this is before we had like the real. Usually we like now we have like all the rounds all the time, and it's going to be a bit different in CS2 thanks to MR13, right? But like you look at it from this standpoint, it's like holy shit, this one went the distance, and it was like two titans battling it out between them. You know, one of the most memorable series of the game. Like, you know, Note was name dropping earlier the FaZe clan versus Navi IM Cologne from more recent history, but like. This was kind of like the first version or first installment of something like on that level where both of the teams are elite. One of them might have fallen off a little bit, but you know, they're proving that they still got it. And then the other team is like trying to just win another tournament, you know, add to their legacy because they haven't, you know, other than the majors, right? There wasn't really that much going on for SK. So it was really, really like high stakes match for both teams. It meant a lot for their legacy. And the fact that they managed to make it to all 5 maps, and there was OT in 2 of those maps, and the last map goes to double OT, like Maui said. Yeah. Great pick. You know, makes a lot of sense.
Unless I'm misremembering too, I'm pretty sure before this, not a lot of series were best of 5 at all. Like even grand finals for events like ESL didn't really do it. Most big organizers didn't really do it. And I almost feel like this series is what convinced like people like, oh yeah, we should do best of 5s for every grand final for big events.
Yeah.
Because it was such a banger.
Yeah.
I remember there was a discourse about BO5s like around this time, and and unfortunately this one was so good though that people started or ESL started overusing them, and then it was like, oh wait, they can actually be pretty bad too. Like, let's just be honest. All right, Mix, what's your series, your favorite series?
I mean, I didn't want to be cliche, but I just can't think of anything that's better.
I was going to say we need to bring it up if no one brings it up.
It has to be Boston. Like, it just has to be. Like, I remember...
Oh, Boston. Oh, okay.
Wait, what did you think it was going to be?
I thought he was going to say Cologne 2022. I thought, okay, whatever. Okay,
why would you... What are you talking about? Come on.
You're right. It's Mix. What am I talking about?
What are you talking about, man? Come on now.
Of course, it has to be. It has to be this one.
But listen. I went to... So that day, right? So I had been out of CS for like months. Like, I hadn't been playing or watching or anything. I like pretty much given up on the game. I was doing other things, but I still like paid attention to it because that's what I do. And I remember I went to like the fucking NFL Pro Bowl that day, and like halfway through, I think I saw that like they lost Overpass. Right? They were like they had the lead on the first map and they lost. I was like, oh fuck, these guys suck. Like, they're not going to win anything. And so I think
it was competitive on map 1 Mirage. Like, they almost won it,
but that was their map pick. So I figured, like, they lost, they'll go to Mirage, they'll fucking lose. Like, but at least they got to the finals, right? And then I saw that like they won Mirage. So it was like halftime. So I was like, "Fuck, dude! Like I gotta go home. Like I gotta watch like."
No, it's
map
it's
three of
flipped.
this
It's
shit."
flipped. It's flipped. It's flipped.
Mirage
It
is
was
map
Cloud9
one,
lost
Overpass is
Mirage.
That's
They
right,
won
that's right.
Overpass.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. They lost Mirage. They won Overpass. And then so they won Overpass. Like, oh fuck! Like I gotta go home and I gotta catch like the end of this.
Yeah.
So I get home and like that was the most, especially because like I'm a huge fucking NA fanboy, right? But that was the most intense game of CS I've ever felt or watched. Like it was just you could just feel the fucking pressure from just like in my room watching alone. Like you could just fucking feel the intensity of it.
Yes.
Like the crowd was going crazy. You can feel them behind. You can just feel like how much that is on FaZe's shoulders and like the like what they're feeling. It was just so intense from like 15-10 on or whatever it was. Like the intensity of each round of each moment was just off the fucking charts, and I feel like I've never felt that in a game like since or before that. It was just crazy. Like I've never felt intensity like that. It really like brought me back to like, okay, like I actually want to like be involved in CS again. Like I want to try to like do something because that was fucking awesome and that was like just insane. So it has to be that for me. I've never felt a game as intense or where the pressure was that much, and like just the insane highs of it, like C9 winning in front of like their home fans, like the crowd's going crazy, and also like the crazy lows of like FaZe just having like their head in their hands, just like suffering the most massive fucking choke of their careers.
Yeah.
Guardian never wins a major. Nico
Yeah.
never wins a major. Like just absolute like insanity when you think about it, looking back on it.
It's I mean that I'll say also that Inferno I was in TeamSpeak with maybe like 7 people, and we were all just constantly losing our shit.
Yeah.
Like it was just it was the most, okay, I'll say like, I'll give it to this one. It was the most excited I've ever been of a game sitting in my room.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
I've never,
I was shaking like in my room, like from each round, like in overtime. Like I remember the rounds where I thought they were gonna fucking blow it when like they had the lead and like the win, and they would like blow. Like Nico like the round where Nico like hid in the smoke and then killed the bomb carrier, and then like they lost the round because that. Like you're just like so many insane like highs and lows between the overtimes. It was just fucking mad.
Production was also banger for that series.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the production was crazy. Yeah,
It made watching it
Super.
online so much better too.
yeah.
Not
I-
better than the arena, obviously, but I just mean like it compared to other series online.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When you actually bring up the fact that like in retrospect how career defining this series was for so many people, like this could have been Kerrigan and Reigns first, like Nico, the fact like basically everything that happened with FaZe all came down to them losing this map of Inferno. Like the fact that they booted Kerrigan, he had to go on his whole redemption arc after, bring it back to FaZe, actually win a major with them, and then like you're saying with Nico and Guardian being the first and second best players to never both win a major, essentially, like that's just so, it feels so criminal. But the fact that it ended up with like the solace we all take from it is that it is North America's one and only major, and so there's a lot of pride in this one.
FaZe blew a 14-11 lead.
I will say, even like this is sorry note, but it's also 5 Americans that did it too. No, there's an extra level to it there where it's like, I also never really worry anymore if it's like a Canadian or 2 on the team, but it's like it's actually it's like every time in history now we see North American lineups that are good, it's usually like you got a couple Canadians on there, like the Optic lineup before, the Liquid lineup since this, and everything like that. It's always like there's a bit of an infusion, but this is like the one time you see a 5-man American lineup and they actually won a major. It just makes you think like why is this region so destitute now when this was actually possible at one point in time?
It feels like the only person whose career wasn't really defined by that final was Olaf. Because he'd already like won.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Totally.
He was straight Sean. He was like, "Damn, that sucks."
Yeah, I've won these before. It's fine.
Nico, you good? Nico's just like completely blank, just like his mind just gone.
That's where you got the clip of Nico's eyes rolling into the back of his head. Like, holy shit!
Yeah,
like, that wasn't when he lost, but that was like in the middle of that last map. He could not believe that this is being like slipping away from him. Yeah, it's just a crazy series. It's bad. Like Overpass wasn't really that good to watch. Mirage was more exciting and like heartbreaking for the NA fans because especially what you, like Mick said, you would think that they would drop Overpass. Overpass was kind of like a dumpster. Like it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was
Overpass
a little more one-sided.
Overpass was just interesting because you were sure that like after FaZe won map 1 on C9's map pick that they were just gonna fucking trash C9 on Overpass.
Yeah.
Whereas like when C9 came out and like they just kind of like you said, like just kind of like commanded the whole map. It was pretty surprising, and it led to like a really interesting map 3.
Right.
Also, like, again, needs to be brought up. Like, this has been said before about this run, but like, while we're here, the run that Cloud9 had
Yes.
at this major is like, because I know Thorin, or I think a couple people brought up the idea of like, is this a fluke major win? And you look at the teams that they beat in order to get here.
Super
like
legit.
they beat.
Yeah.
It's one of the most I think is the most legit major run ever.
It was like
you
4
beat
and 2 or something like that, right? They beat number 4, number 2, and number 1.
They beat like
together.
SK.
No, they beat number 1, number 2,
Yeah.
and number 4. They
Yeah,
were number
they did.
5.
Right, yeah,
It's a
so they
super
were.
legit run.
SK was number 1, FaZe was number 2, and then G2 was number 5. Like, it couldn't have. I mean, theoretically, yeah, you could have beat the number 3 team also, but when
Yeah.
you're the ranked number 5 team and that's what you're doing, you're basic. Like, you could have swapped one team to make this run harder for them in the playoffs, and they beat the number 1 and number 2.
Yeah.
I also want to give a shout out because someone pointed this out. NIP versus Fnatic Cologne 2014 banger, and also NIP versus Cloud9 Cologne 2014 straight fucking banger, especially Cobble. And also, if you go back and watch Cloud9 versus NIP on Nuke, there's a double auto sniper going on there. I'm just saying, fucking crazy. It's worth the watch just for that. Double auto sniper CT side nuke.
I
Yeah,
saw
Art's been watching that demo on repeat, I guess.
Oh
Yeah,
god.
yeah.
Oh, the art. Oh, the art shots.
I could not believe my eyes.
Oh my god. You would never understand though.
No, you would never
Pranogo, what's your hipster pick that
All
you were
right,
prefacing?
I'm dropping this one in the chat, boys. Everybody, check it out. This is for me. It's got to be the series that put international Counter-Strike in its destined place, where now everybody goes for international rosters pretty much. Like, the idea of having regional matchups or anything like that, it's just like you don't really have those anymore at the highest level. There's going to be some exceptions, but for the most part, people are looking to build teams of mercenaries from disparate cultures and put them together and have the band of brotherhood sort of come out of that. So with that being said, I am picking ESL1 Belo Horizonte 2018 FaZe Clan against Maus, or as they were called back in the day, Maus Sports, where Maus Sports had nothing as a stand-in and FaZe had Croman as a stand-in. That is to me.
This is so ridiculous.
That to me is the.
This is like looking at these rosters is stupid.
Yeah, this is worse than me picking Montu over Ziwu. I don't care.
I think this is the series that defines Counter-Strike. Honestly, like, come on. That's no, but like for
Imagine
real,
he could have picked IEM Cologne 2020.
I could have. It was left open.
Okay.
But it wasn't as good as
let's hear it.
watching nothing go 63 and 98 over BO5.
I need to hear more. Okay, why? What else? What else led
There's
you
only
to this
one
ridiculous
close map. What was so good about this?
Yeah.
So to me, this was just the map. This is a series that was played like a couple years after I got into Counter-Strike, and I remember thinking like, okay, nothing is on Maus. Like, I mean, living up to his name, maybe like this team's not going to do much. But then like they make it all the way to the grand finals with this like surprise. This kind of mirrors in some ways if you think back to like Snacks on ENCE when I can't remember who couldn't make it. Was it Spinks who couldn't make it on ENCE in IEM Dallas from a couple years back?
Yes.
It's like,
Yes.
yeah, it's like, how the hell are
Last
they
year,
making
yeah.
it like their best player is out with a stand-in who hasn't played in a while, but he just like rolls back the years and does it. So there's always that going on for it, where this is a weird, it's just such an eclectic mix of players on both sides, where you've got Rain standing in, I guess for Olaf Meister, because it's back when, or not Rain, Croman standing in for Olaf Meister back in the day, is like just a nobody who's done nothing before, nothing since, like just somehow FaZe win a championship with him. But like the fact that both of these teams were kind of scuffed, but they still made for an entertaining series if you go back and watch it, to me, like, I'm not going to lie, the other pick that I was thinking about doing was it Mouse Sports winning one of the CS Summit tournaments where they had Natosafix and then they had Regent standing in because Kerrigan had to take a flight in the middle of the series. So stuff like that to me is like, that's really what Counter-Strike is. That's the grassroots aspect of Counter-Strike. That's where it's all scuffed, but you still manage to make really good, stuff happen. And the fact that G2 still couldn't win that CS Summit series, shout out G2.
That's so funny.
Absolutely ridiculous. Like they had 2 stand-ins at one point and you still couldn't do it. So yeah, I don't know. That one gets me. And yeah, again, this one that I picked is honestly like memorable because Kerrigan wins a tournament with a stand-in with an international lineup in a best of 5. against some of the world's best like nothing. No, but like seriously, like this Mouse team, the fact that they were able to get this far too is like both of them are underdogs or fairy tales or Cinderella stories. Just when you factor in the shading in the context around them, and they both end up making it, and they both could have won it, judging by the map scores. So it's memorable because of how wacky it was, and this is when Counter-Strike could be wacky and you would still fucking watch it. Now you don't really get that same level of wackiness. Besides maybe like Gamer Legion making it to the major finals or whatever. It's like you don't really see wackiness though, like not in the same level. So this was the wacky era, the awkward years.
This is too much of a hipster pick for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember this series. I will be honest with you.
Well, you just have to take my word for it. It was really good.
This is one to go back and look at, I suppose. This is actually
one of the series of all time.
A deep rewind.
Yeah.
yeah.
I was gonna get like 40 minutes in. He's like, "What the fuck is?"
Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
Nothing's just like standing still, dying with his nades out like usual.
He looks like, I mean, nothing was doing well in this tournament before this series, though.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
You could have picked like New York 2017, where Nico hit like a 1.8 rating in the final or some shit.
I didn't want to do that to the NA fans though. That was Liquid getting absolutely dumpstered. JDM knifing his teammate, walking out Inferno T side. Like, just go next, you know. Oh wait, this is the last map. Okay, good.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next category, which is kind of more like where you just get to talk about anything that really caught your eye throughout the history of CSGO. There's so many fun narratives and storylines. So this is a moment where just like fun shit that happened in CSGO essentially, where it really like held your attention or just led to some fucking memes.
I got one.
Okay, mix.
I got one.
Let's
so
hear
I remember.
Let's hear...
So you're gonna know exactly what I say it was, but the Berlin Major, Liquid versus Astralis. And I remember I was watching. I was at the Singularity team house because I was like in Chicago for some reason, and so I was watching him at Floppy, and so we were the only two that were like up early to like watch the fucking match, to, like watch the matches. And so I remember just watching with him, like ordering breakfast, and like our reactions when like we saw Astralis actually pick Vertigo.
Yeah,
it was just like, because I had such high hopes for like Liquid actually like winning a fucking major, and like it's like first Astralis, and you're like, surely there's no way like Astralis is gonna do it, right? Like they're not gonna pick Vertigo, and then they fucking pick it, and it felt like it just turned like the entire like mental battle of the series like on its head. Like I really feel like it was genuinely significant, that Vertigo pick, in terms of like the overall series and like how it affected Liquid mentally. So I don't know, that moment just always stood out to me as just like great mind games. And I guess just because, you know, I was watching with Ricky, and that was like a nice experience to be like watching it with him, and always like it was just fun. It was just like, it was just a funny moment.
That single pick in a lot of ways ruined Liquid. Yeah, on it, like I truly believe that when you get down to the fact that Liquid were unable to actually bring themselves back to their pre-player break form after that, and then everybody kind of after a while went their separate ways. Yeah. That if Astralis didn't pull that Vertigo pick out of thin air and actually win the series due in part because of it, then we could have, like, I'm convinced that if Liquid actually, let's just say they play a normal map, they could potentially have won it, end up winning. They probably, to me, they would have won the whole major. If they beat Astralis, I'd say they win the major there. And then you have this capstone to the fact that you win the Grand Slam. You still were able to keep it together after the player break. You were able to push yourselves through it. That team could have had an error. Like, it pretty much was like the team that almost had like the shortest era ever. It's just like was such a high ceiling for that Liquid team that they could never find it again. But if they somehow brought back the confidence by beating Astralis, winning the major, I think that team might have gone down as like one of the best 5-man rosters in history. It's
really interesting because this wasn't even the time where they were still banning Train against Astralis here, like their permaban. They didn't ban Nuke. Like Astralis had Nuke open, which they never lost against Liquid.
They thought they were going to pick it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's like surely they just pick Nuke, right? Like there's no reason they wouldn't pick Nuke. But I feel like the Vertigo pick, it was a risk. Like it could have just, like if they lost Vertigo, they would have looked like fucking morons. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
So it was like a risk in that. So, but I think them picking Vertigo over Nuke and then winning the map very handedly, I think honestly just broke Liquid mentally, and I don't think they ever really recovered from it.
I have a vague memory of Naf actually falling off the map in that series too. I think that might have happened. He like backpedaled onto the B-bomb site before they added the railguard. You guys know what I'm talking about?
You might be right.
I feel like that
I
happened.
remember
Like
something
when I
that, yeah.
saw them just losing in that fashion, I knew, oh shit, Liquid's not going to be able to win this series because they were not really a streaky team unless you think that the entire Grand Slam run was a streak, but they were. You could clearly tell when they were feeling it. You know, they were very like an emotional team, I would say. And that's generally been how North American teams have been constructed. Also, is like, let's try to make sure that we were like a band of brothers and we got all this stuff. And like, you know, you don't want to play with people who bring the energy down and all this other stuff too.
And I feel like it was probably like sort of Astralis' mindset in that like if they pick Nuke and they win Nuke, that's not going to like really affect Liquid that much. It's like I don't think Liquid is really going in like with their expectations on like we're gonna win Nuke this time, like for sure. Like I think they could have lost Nuke. Okay, it's fucking Astralis on Nuke. It is what it is. And then you go on to like Overpass and Inferno, and those are still your maps. I think going to Vertigo, losing it, just not expecting it, just throwing yourself off completely mentally. I think it just like kind of ruined them in the next map as well.
Yeah, I think the player break just ruined their confidence somehow. Like the fact that they didn't barely squeak in. I think they went in 3-1 into the playoffs.
Yeah,
they lost a series.
Been like a sharp.
Yeah, they weren't looking as indomitable as before, and then you can maybe throw shade at the seeding or whatever. Like, how the fuck did Liquid and Astralis, who we were hoping would actually be the grand final of this major, presumably, like how the hell did they end up as a quarterfinal matchup? But you know, you got to be who's in front of you, and Liquid at the end of the day did not do that. So.
Okay, my favorite was kind of related to this also. One of my favorite storylines was because it's the first time that I had like a tier 1 player block me on Twitter too. Is when
Not the last time, it's the first time.
Definitely not. Was the whole Stewie for Taco swap, the 1-for-1.
Yes.
Yeah.
Me and you were on this train immediately.
Yeah, I was so hyped about it. I mean, I wrote the tweet that I was like, Stewie's going to be better at 80% of the things than Taco is, so this is just such a win for Liquid, and they're already looking really good. And I was like, as long as they don't let the 20% of things Taco's better at than Stewie overtake that, or like somehow like come to the forefront of this whole move, they're going to be in a much better position, which is when Taco blocked me, which I was like, bro, my post was so reasonable. Like, how are you going to be salty about that? But also, I remember Stewie replied to this too, and this was also before like This was before I was even working tier 1 events too. So for Taco to take my like either to hear what I had to say and then thought I deserved to be blocked was just hilarious at the time for me, because it was one of the first where I was like, oh, you're actually reacting to what I say. It's like, even though, why should you even care what I have to say? But also, like, whatever. To this day, he actually unblocks me. Taco has unblocked me twice. When Taco actually plays at tournaments that I'm at, for some reason, he unblocks me, and then once the tournament's over, he did this for 2 tournaments. He did this for an RMR event where he unblocked me briefly, and he did this for Flashpoint, one of the Flashpoints, like Flashpoint 1 or maybe 2 or some shit like that. I think it was Flashpoint 1, where he unblocked me, and I was like, okay, are you going to leave me unblocked? And then he just re-blocks me again. It's like, I'm not even tweeting about you. Like, you're actually just doing this. And it's like, I'm not even trying to, like, check. Like, am I checking, like, oh, is Taco still blocking me? No, it's just that I would see his tweets on my timeline from, like, you know, the algorithm popping it up there. And it's like, oh, I can see Taco's tweets all of a sudden. So then it's like, now I can't again. Okay, that's interesting. But the way that led to the Grand Slam was just, like, honestly, like, and the way that Stewie, in terms of intangibles, lifted that team up to finally have confidence in themselves and show a bit more spirit. Yeah. And when it comes to cultural impact, like Stewie jumping on the desk, kind of moment, like that kind of shit is just etched into my brain. And like, so many big moments for individuals throughout that stuff. Like, I think that was when Twist was like, sit the fuck down and shit like that. Like they had all these little hype ass clips and things like that. Like that what happened with that essentially a trade and then the aftermath with the Grand Slam run was just so amazing. And the fact that they actually at first wanted Tarek more than Stewie was also so ridiculous. And then they ended up going to Stewie.
I think Tarek could have worked as well though.
I don't think you win a Grand Slam with Tarek. You don't win a Grand Slam with
Tarek.
You could maybe have won a tournament. Maybe, but like it's such. I don't know if Tarek would have. Stewie brought a fire to that team for sure, and in role wise, he did so much for them.
Yeah. Did you say Stewie said something to you as well when you were talking about all
that? Well, he just replied to the tweet also, but it was just that he like when Taco replied to the tweet and he was salty. Stewie just used like a salt bay GIF on that tweet or something to reply to Taco under my tweet. It was really funny. At the time, like that shit made my day because it's like I wasn't interacting with tier 1 pros like that, but now you know that happens a little more
Now
often.
you got to
but-
dust them off all the time on Twitter, just like.
yeah. Nowadays it's still fun, but usually like it's a little more. It's just more common.
I can't believe you unfollowed Simple Mauisnake. How could you do that?
Never followed ratio.
Ratio. Yeah, he fell off. No, so the thing that this reminds me of that is absolutely something that I think is like a memorable. I don't know if it's like a storyline or a moment or whatever, but for me, it's like just a thing that we used to have all the time was just the banter-filled desks and fill segments from back when tournaments didn't know how to run anything. And you would just get like 40 minutes of pure unfiltered, like whatever the hosts and like obviously like, you know, people like the Gfinity Angels come to mind, like Sir Scoots, Thora, Richard Lewis, that kind of crowd, and like they would just have the most entertaining sort of backs and forth. You had a little bit of that with Antwerp because it was actually kind of a scuffed production, or not Antwerp, Stockholm. Stockholm had a little bit of that too, and then obviously when we got into Antwerp, they had kind of smoothed things out, at least from what people have told me. So that felt like it was not as bad from the production side, but that also kind of I feel like. In a maybe a way that would be seen as like, you know, oh, you're being real, you're being a bit of an asshole to the talent. Like I kind of feel like if you get that as a talent, as a member of talent, you're forged in this crucible of like, oh, I have to be entertaining for a really long amount of time sometimes with no prediction of like when it's going to happen. Like you're not going to get the same level of, you know, banter. I mean, maybe you can accomplish it now by doing like a lot of podcasts or something with people because you can get that back and flow and kind of like have the sort of interplay between the characters that are on the desks and stuff. But like for me, that era of Counter-Strike was when I had the most fun watching that kind of stuff, or just like having it on in the background while I'm doing other things. It's like they had to fill for a long period of time. I was here for the Counter-Strike, but I stayed for the banter, and that was like definitely that's one of the things that allowed me to get into the CS space a lot more than like as somebody who was just still in the learning phase. Like I had followed, you know, Thor and Richard Lewis's content for other things in the past, but like when I started to see them on the desks and see other people sort of like playing off of them, obviously all the Faceit stuff was absolutely ridiculous with fucking manual horse insemination or whatever the fuck Thorin was talking about that one time. There's like some memorable moments.
I don't remember that.
No, he's like, you know, somebody was, I think it was like, it might've been James or Dan or somebody was on the desk with Thorin, and Thorin was mentioning some player had big hands. And he's like, you know what they say about big hands? And Thorin's like, yeah, great for artificially stimulating horses or something. Like, what the fuck? So just like shit like that you'd be able to do. You can't do that anymore. You can't talk about horses anymore, guys. I'm sorry.
I'm glad that you brought that up because it's similar to kind of what I wanted to mention as less of like a moment. I guess like a moment in time more than anything, but like that exact era of like the banter and the deaths was definitely stands out in my mind because it was like I remember back then a lot of people would be like, yeah, I just watched the game and like who the fuck watches analyst segments? But like those were some of the funniest like personality filled segments because even back then like a lot of the players weren't like there was obviously like a bunch of personalities that stood out, but not a lot of them. Like if you didn't know the game, it was harder to like get into it. But back then, like the way the analysts had to fill and had so much banter made it really enjoyable to kind of get into the game. But related to that, back then, Anders and Semler had the whole like room on fire thing going as well. And I don't know how many people actually watch these things, but I've watched each of these videos probably at least 5 to like 8 times somewhere in there. But before some of these events, they used to do these like prediction shows where they would be at the event and then they'd be like getting drunk in a hotel room and they would draw names out of a hat and like just do matchups basically and try and like talk about why their team would win, but it would just be like the most absurd shit completely unrelated to the game. And it was like these kind of content pieces that like made me just kind of like really enjoy watching the personalities and like got like it also was like storylines but nothing actually based in fact. Like there was one episode where I think like Yanko and Semler were talking about like how the Mongols like conquered China or something, and it was just like, but it was like completely wrong. And this is just like there's so much just banter in the series of them. I think they did like 4 of them maybe. I wish they'd done more, but highly recommend people go back and watch those. And Thorin was in all of them, so naturally it was
Mhm.
Yeah.
hilarious. Yeah, I think like tied into that, those were definitely something that that made me like get into the personality side of the game a lot.
Okay. We could move on to the next stuff unless
Yeah.
there's anything else to bring up here. Okay, then let's do this. So this is kind of I feel like this question is a little bit self-explanatory, but I just kind of wanted to know just for you guys to share your experiences. So it's how you consume the game now. I would say like for like I'm more curious like here honestly when it comes to like Pronogo and Mix, since you guys are like a little bit away from it. I just wanted to know like, so when you like Mix, for example, like what are your consumption habits of CSGO? Are you like watching from time to time, just keeping up with score bots? You're not on Twitter even anymore, so what's it look like?
I mean, for a while, especially after like Detonate and after like Complexity didn't really work out for me, I kind of just like wasn't watching or paying attention at all. I kind of just wanted to remove myself from it like completely. But now, like, I'll still follow like HLTV. There's certain teams that I like to follow. I'll follow like the bigger events just because, like, I mean, I still like enjoy watching Counter Strike. You know, it's just a nice way to pass time, and there's certain teams I still like. So for the most part, it's just HLTV really. HLTV, find what's on. Like I said, there's certain teams that I'll follow and still watch, like Complexity when they're on. I still like to watch Wildcard, which is the guys I was working with before. Just NA in general, which is kind of see like how the region's doing. So I'd say like NA, I still like watch a pretty good amount of. Yeah, but other than that, it's just if there's like a big event on, if there's like an event that's easy to watch, I'll watch it.
Mhm.
But yeah, nothing too crazy. Just kind of that type of stuff. And in terms of like Twitch streams and stuff, I think the only person I've been watching is Steel, because it's nice. I think I mentioned earlier, like it's nice to watch Steel play like a shitty version of Counter Strike, or at least shitty version. It brings back a lot of memories from 2014 of early Counter Strike Go.
Okay, yeah.
And like, I think I said this to him as well, is that like the only thing in CS that actually like interests me in terms of like if I was to like coach again or something would be like teaming with Steel, just in some capacity. Like that's the only thing I can think of. Like, because I had seen like Navi like sending out like like applications for like analysts or like, and it's like it just doesn't interest me. Like it doesn't interest me. I don't feel like any passion for that type of thing. But like
Yeah.
certain things still work that up in me. Like teaming with Steel is something that like I never got to do. I passed over Chaos in 2019 to join Cloud9. And like
Mhm.
my only regret with that was like, man, like I really want to be on a team with Steel. Like that would have been awesome, because like that's the guy that really got me into like analytical CS and like really thinking about the game and like the competitiveness of it. So yeah, I just watch Steel just to kind of like keep up with CS2 and see how the game's doing, the FPL and all that stuff. But other than that, it's just like checking HLTV, see if there's any games that are interesting on, and just checking those out. And maybe
Okay.
like if I see like an interesting result, maybe I'll go on Reddit and like look at the game thread or something like that.
So not interested in helping Simple, but Steel's the guy.
Yeah,
He's pretty.
like
It is very
like the normal
nostalgic.
human, like the
Yeah.
normal human that I am.
Yeah. Yeah,
Simple,
Wait.
Steel, who by the way, I bet on the game that he threw. That's something I fuck with. Get me on that guy's team right now.
Does anybody know if he's still is it technically not banned in CS2 because it's like a different game, or does anybody know that?
No, they said, I think they mentioned the bands carryover.
Oh,
Oh my god! Actually, that hurts me to hear that. Honestly,
Don't take that for gospel, but I'm like,
That's
I
kind of
feel
the
like
Valve
I read
answer.
that somewhere, but I might be wrong.
Oh, that's,
It's been eight. It's been 8 years. I personally lost skins on the game, so I feel if I want them unbanned, they deserve to be unbanned. So Valve should listen to me.
all right. And now you can.
I have no
Yeah. No.
and then I'm free to team with Steel.
There you go. Yeah, that makes sense.
Pronogo, what about you? Your consumption habits?
It's been a lot of shoulder content, or it's not really shoulder content, I guess. It's just like content from analysts and like, a big surprise. I still watch Mauisnake's uploads when he uploads, right? But I also watch Richard Lewis a lot. I watch the Thorin videos, of course. For a while, I was checking out Talking Counter as well, as far as like podcasts go. They've kind of emerged as like a premier sort of podcast, especially now that we don't have as many, by the numbers or indeed it's server time episodes coming out. So like, there's just occasional podcasts I'll listen to if I'm at my shift work, which I only do a couple times out of the week, so not super often. But that is where I sort of keep up with the scene and the developments. And other times, if I have like a 5-minute break or something between what I'm normally doing with the game development stuff, I might pop onto HLTV, check out the recent results. The only times I'll be watching like games or when we have LANs again, so I'll definitely be tuning into like obviously the Australian LAN that's coming up, right? But beyond that, it's been a lot of just consuming the content, and admittedly, I have been seeking out some interesting people's videos or whatever when it comes to CS2, because I'm from a game developer standpoint, I'm interested in how CS2 has been sort of marketed and actually deployed, and the things that they have as problems. Like, I guess they still haven't fixed the bug where you just like load a different map into a new map, so you like go into Anubis or something, and you still have like Dust 2 like layout or something or whatever. I don't know if anybody here has had that bug, but it's like a common enough that people keep posting it about like once a day or something on their subreddit. So I'll check stuff like that just to see how things are developing. I have tried to play CS2, and I say tried, but that was back when they had the AMD issues, and my computer's fully AMD basically. So I was just getting stuttering every single time I fired a Glock, and I was like, yeah, probably not ready, probably not for me yet. So. But it's interesting to see the game. I think it's an exciting time, even though a lot of people are obviously down on it right now because it has a lot of issues. Unfortunately, it's standard fare, guys, that game developers will release buggy, incomplete messes, and you will beta test them. So you are still beta testing them even right now, even though it's released. But hey, at least Counter-Strike is not a game where you have to pay $60 to be afforded the privilege of beta testing, unlike most other games. So just enjoy that part. Like it's slim pickings if you're in the gaming space because the industry is so fucked. But you guys still have it better than people beta testing the latest single player game from Star Wars or whatever the fuck. So.
I think people forget just how buggy CSGO was though when it released. Like, dude, the mollies slowed you down and you couldn't extinguish them. Like, have fun playing that game, But just on the topic of what you were saying with maps popping in like random things, there was a clip where somebody was like trying to go out B-Apps Mirage, and then like I don't know, I think like half wall appeared in apps in front of them, and then they tried to like ignore it and strafe and peek out the window towards like market window, and then like car just is like directly in front of the window. There's shit like that that's just like some of it is just genuinely funny. Like you can't help but laugh watching it.
Yeah. I feel like
I will. I actually, since they're kind of talking about like how they watch the game now, I have a question for you, Alex, which would be, how do you consume the game now versus like, let's say like a year after you started watching Counter-Strike?
Well, for Pro League, I was doing co-streams the entire time, so I was watching everything live, which was not generally speaking how I do it. I'll say like when I'm actually preparing for events nowadays, and I need to get in a lot of information as quick as humanly possible, and like relevant information, what I generally do, which is is that I usually go on 2 websites like the most. I go on, well, HLTV also, but I guess I use Leadify Starcaller a lot, and I use Skybox a lot. I use those 2 programs in conjunction to figure out tendencies of teams and understand like macro elements to their gameplay, because demos are good, and I actually usually try to watch a demo of a player that I don't know and just kind of zoom through it and just see what they do on gun rounds or anything like that to find out their tendencies so I have some more information about them. But I find that a lot of people don't characterize macro elements of teams as much on desks, so I will try to always bring that to the table, along with obviously hot takes and funny shit that I try to bring too. But if I can at least paint that picture, I know I'm adding value to the broadcast. So like after the fact of a game happening, it's like, especially if it's a game with a surprising result, I'll try to see like, oh, okay, there was Movi started really well in the group stage. What characterized their play? Okay, cool. I'll watch few skyboxes of them, because I can get through like 3 skyboxes in like 30 minutes if I just watch gun rounds. So I can be like, oh, okay, they're doing these kinds of control methods that led to them kind of upsetting some teams that they normally don't end up actually beating. So Skybox is super, super valuable to me. I don't know if it's working in CS2. I haven't actually tried it just yet, but I would say beyond that, the co-streaming and stuff like that is where I have a lot of fun with just still enjoying the game live.
Is Starcaller working in CS2 yet?
I haven't really checked that out either. Like I was doing this during Pro League, and
Okay.
showdown a little bit, but not I don't know yet. I don't know if CS2 has broken all these things.
Well, Ebot just released apparently.
Yeah,
I
I
saw
did.
that, so that's pretty good. That's for
Okay.
like tournament ops and stuff. So yeah, we're slowly gonna see the rollout of things. It's clearly not ready for competitive with all the bugs and all the other.
Can't wait for
issues.
Sydney. I can't fucking
Yeah,
wait.
I'm looking
Sydney's
forward
gonna
to
be
it.
so busted.
It's gonna be awesome.
It is going to be a
awesome.
great time. I don't know what you guys are talking about.
It's going to be absolute peak insanity, like that Belo Horizonte pick I had for the greatest series. You know, were my favorite series. That's Sydney's going to be like that, but all over again. So.
Well, before we move on, Note, is there anything you do differently now?
I think I definitely play the game less now, just based on time and like other IRL stuff happening.
Sure.
But I don't know. Other than that, I think compared to when I first started watching CS:GO, obviously now I can't bet. So initially, when I was watching the game and just enjoying it, that was like a fun way to add stakes to it. But now now I just kind of like really enjoyed the game itself, and I'm looking forward to CS2 kind of reviving a bit of that too, because it's definitely been pretty stale the last, I don't know, 6 months or so,
right?
If not a little longer.
I would agree with that. I've been thinking about adding betting to the mix as well, but technically I still have a bunch of like contacts with orgs, and I still like know a lot of players and shit. And I still feel like, even though I'm not really active as an analyst or in the space as much, it's probably still not really that great if I'm, just based on all the shit that I know that I can't like try to like Men in Black memory wipe. It's like, I kind of know a lot of things that would influence that. So.
Earlier, so like my 3 favorite players, if I didn't say automatic, I was actually thinking of saying Brax or Swag, because that was the player that I really enjoyed watching when I first got into CS, who also threw for my skins.
Yeah, your top 3 should have just been Steel, Brax, and Skadoodle or something.
It's just AZK.
yeah.
Actually, I don't think anybody's favorite player is AZK. Even then, I don't think he was usually at people's top of the list.
Player, yeah.
Braxton.
Yeah.
Also a classic miscellaneous moment, by the way.
Okay,
that's
so
odd tier rank S clip.
Yeah, it is.
We're over 3 hours on the stream itself, so let's try to wrap this thing up. So the last portion of this podcast was just going to be like people giving thanks to CS:GO, and if you had anything about like how the game changed your life or what it's done for you. Let's go with how about Pronogo? We'll go with you, Pronogo. What did CS:GO do for you as a game?
Well, it was nice to get into a game that wasn't Brood War as far as the esports scene. Unfortunately, I did later find out that it, just like Brood War, it has a match fixing problem. But beyond that, it was pretty cool. It was pretty based, honestly. And in general, I would say CS:GO was like a really cool thing to get into, and then realize that like I saw a bit of a vacancy for, interviews and podcasts and stuff. That's where I started my own channel, Semi Pronogo, and started doing a lot of that stuff. And that was after I had been doing production for Peaker's Advantage, which had been a show that I had watched a couple episodes of, prior and enjoyed when I was just scoping out a bunch of podcast content. And so that's obviously when I went Mauisnake. And obviously I also met the other crew, Davey and Semphis, and so on and so forth. That was exclusively not having my own camera here. And then, when we got to its server time, eventually I managed to, bully some stuff around and like get my own space and stuff, which was pretty cool. But honestly, the Peaker's Advantage stuff was the first time that I had tried to do like live production, because that was the show that really tried to be live. We also had that Return Fire thing, which was like a shorter, like we just like laugh at your dumb messages, basically, if you're a chatter or something. Like we just captured a bunch of comments and answered some serious questions, and then we would also sometimes have like guests for just like 30 minutes or just like 20 minutes or whatever. So it was kind of fun that we had like the different styles, and I got to like dabble in OBS more exhaustively using OBS, Vegas, and a bunch of other tools like Photoshop and stuff more than I had previously. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that I like learned just from being tangentially like related to CS, doing this production stuff. And it's very much like if you're trying to do like esports work or anything like that, it's very much a pick yourself up and do it, like learn stuff on the fly. And I was, happy to have been able to been given that opportunity, do my own content, and then most importantly, I think, in terms of like raw impact on the space, its server time was definitely like the biggest thing within Counter-Strike that I had contributed towards for the longest amount of time, and that was pretty cool for me just to be, not just a producer, not just a discount Sam or whatever, but also being able to do stuff that was, providing my own sort of, or I was provided with my own sort of platform to talk about things that I thought were interesting about the game. Obviously, I got really into like the custom maps and stuff, and as this episode and others like it have illustrated, I have some very non-standard takes. So I'm glad that I got to get those out there.
Yeah. Okay. No. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this game gave me like way more than I ever expected and continues to. I think I initially only found it in 2015 and was just casually following it. And for that to turn into my full-time job and for me to be able to go to Europe, which I'd never done before, to travel different parts of the world, go to Sydney this weekend, like that is just incredibly cool and something that I will never stop being grateful for. And I think the fact that I got into it by just like casually writing like previews for matches that were happening because I was betting on games, and for that to get noticed and then to like actually get into it from that it's just so weird to explain to people. And like every time someone's like, oh, what do you do? I'm like, oh, I writer, and they're like, oh, like, did you go to school as a journalist? Not at all. But it is like something that I'm eternally grateful for, and the kind of the people I've met here and being able to like turn gaming into like my full-time job and passion is incredibly cool. And I think for me, things that like when we started doing server time, it really stood out because shortly after that, I would go to events more frequently, and I would have people like you were at the bar, like the player bar, or you were out somewhere with like talent, or you were out somewhere with your coworkers, and there'd be people who'd like come up to it and be like, "Oh, hey, like love it server time. Like thanks for doing that," or like they'd be like, "Hey, like really like your articles," and I was like, "Okay, this is actually really really fucking cool that there's people like actively knowing who I am and walking up and like expressing their thanks for that." And I thought that was kind of like being able to travel, see parts of the world, and then have people acknowledge what I was doing was like very like that. Those were moments where I was like, okay, like I actually am doing something with this, and I like being able to do that and continue doing that is just incredible.
Mix with the ups and downs of it.
God damn. I mean, I got super into so 2014 is when I got super into it, especially like around Cologne that year. And so like when I obsess over something, like I obsess over like that shit becomes my life. Like I was a full fucking NACS fanboy. I watched every match. Like I would go into I remember when I was like my sophomore year of high school, I had like a couple friends that also like kind of watched, not as much as me, but like we would go into like AP computer science class and like we'd go on HLTV and we'd like play around with like the inspect element and like put our names in like articles and stuff. So like when I was like in high school and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, just to then like, and I was a kid, like I never really had like a lot of friends. I never had like a lot of confidence in myself, like at all. I pretty much was just doing whatever. And so this game and like actually pursuing like coaching and analysts like opened up like a whole new world to myself and helped me understand myself so much more. It helped me like gain confidence and realize that like when I really like set my mind to something and like really pursued it, I could like make a lot of things happen, and I could really push myself to see things in a different way and really push the boundaries of what I think coaching was, or like how CSGO was doing it, that type of stuff. And I really prided myself on that, like trying to find new ways to do things and like really trying to push things forward into the way I wanted to. And so even now, like I still have a lot of confidence that like, if I were to suddenly be the head coach of a team, that I would be successful and I would do a great job. But obviously, so it's had its ups and like gave me tons of confidence, helped me travel the world for the first time, go to Europe, meet like tons of friends and have like amazing experiences, especially with that ATK C9 group, like JT, Floppy, Sonic, MOTM, Tion, OC, obviously. just amazing memories that I'll have like the rest of my life. And I'm even thankful for all the fucking shitty parts of it. Like the Colossus period was probably the worst time of my life. Like there was nothing good about that. I was in LA alone by myself on this dumpster fire of a fucking team with a manager I hated, and like it just kind of sucked. and so like even like the bad parts of it, like it's whole fucking story, right? And so I like that. Like it gave me confidence and made me realize like what I can do. And now like I'm never gonna like rule out doing CS again at all. Like I'm not gonna say like I'm never gonna coach again or something, like because I don't fucking know. Like you never know, I think. But it gave me confidence to like do something that I never thought I would have the confidence to do, which is like actively really pursue like pro wrestling. Something like that. Like now I have like I've experienced so many like ups and downs of emotions, and I have so many things that I want to like express in my own way, and like stories that I want to tell in my own way. And a lot of that and the confidence I have to do that is pretty much due to this game. So I have a lot of appreciation for it, even if it's like given me some of the worst moments of my life as well.
Yeah, I think in general, what you'll find in life as a broad philosophical point is that you got to be thankful for the bad times, because they really do make you who you are at the end. And, I know that sounds a bit out of place almost when you're talking about a game, but no, seriously, like the work, dedicating a lot of time and dedicating, your day in, day out, making it a profession, making it your work, and doing that work is absolutely something that has, given me yet more things to think about in my own life, and provided me with a lot of, I would say, like, connections with friendships and even just acquaintances that I hold really dear. Like the fact that I can say that I did 41 episodes now with you guys, and all the people that came in for guests and stuff, and like you build something with that kind of thing. You get a feeling that like, oh shit, there's like camaraderie, and there's like we're in this together trying to work on something, make something good together. That kind of stuff is absolutely character building, and I imagine it's only more so when you're working on a team as a coach or an analyst in the same way, Mix, right? It's like you really are trying to like get to the top or as high as you can realistically go. And the struggle is what kind of makes it worth it in some ways. It's like some weird way, like that just feels like that's just how it is. So
hopefully in 3 years, I'll show back up on your fucking timeline landing in a pile of thumbtacks in a wrestling ring. So
there you go.
Okay.
That's my hope.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I would thank it for a lot of similar reasons. I think the point you bring up, Mix, with confidence has been massive too, because I always saw myself as somebody with a lot of potential to do stuff, and it was until finding this space and making a name for myself in this space that I was able to finally actualize that potential and make something of all of this kind of like wherewithal that I felt like I possessed, and then dedicating myself to it and honing my skills at the broadcast side of the craft and making myself a personality. Now it's like when I go into especially social situations, I find that I bring a lot of that charisma with me. And then, like, for example, I had this moment where I was visiting one of my best friends in Japan, and I roomed with this guy for like a year, and he was like my best friend throughout college. So like he knew me really, really well. But then he kind of, we finally interacted, and this was like earlier this year in January when I was in Japan, and it was like, and he said like, oh, the way he sees me now is like I have this, he says like I have an aura around me now. Like when he interacts with me now, he can sense this like deeper self-confidence that he didn't see it in me before, and now it's like I know that when I interact with people, that stuff rubs off and it's contagious in some ways. So I think that's wholly due to the fact that I was able to find myself in this space and become such a figure. And beyond that, I think that the role itself as an analyst has done everything I've wanted to do in terms of just impacting people's lives, because this is a story from Dallas where a fan came up to me at the hotel bar, and he wanted to buy me a drink because he said like he had this friend that he used to go on Discord with all the time after like Hot Take Point Made or Snake and Banter, or even just like a death segment I did where he would talk to his friend on Discord about like what it is that I said, and they would break down my point, or even a tweet that I had and say like, oh, what did what did they think of that? Like, did they think that was good? Did they think that's accurate? They would debate it, and they would like get to know each other because they would go on these debates about my points. And then the reason he like really wanted to buy me a drink because that friend passed away of his, but he really wanted to like share that story of like how I brought him and his friends so close together. And I was like, okay, that's exactly what this job's about. And so CSGO gave me a vehicle to have that sort of impact in people's lives. So I'm just, yeah, without it, I don't know what I would be doing, but it would not have had the same effect on people's lives. That's for sure.
Yeah, this podcast gave me a ton of confidence. Just like consistently talking in front of a camera so often, I think just gives you like a little bit more natural to feel, even just like normal conversation. It just feels a lot easier.
Same.
Yeah.
Like you said, like even to your point, like I remember like my best friend even told me something similar in that like when she first met me in like 2019, like before I did the whole thing with ATK and C9, and then when she met me after like everything had happened, like the Colossus, everything, like 2 years later, like I was like just a completely different person in terms of like my confidence and like just like even how I spoke or like, you know, how you move around, like just all those types of things. Like you're just so much more like in tune with myself, so much more like at peace and like confident in myself. And it's just like a really cool thing to experience in such a short period of time, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, one last round of shout outs. So I didn't even tell you guys we're going to do it, but it's how we end every single episode. So just shout out what it is that you're up to next. No, you're up first. What's your shout out?
Oh, up to next. I mean, I'm going to Sydney.
Or
and
shout
then
out. You just
Shanghai,
want to do
so
a
that'll be
general
fun.
shout out.
I was gonna shout out Mix's Nantu pick.
Dude, I
which
never
will go down in history of this podcast.
I never said he was better than Ziwu, for the record.
But you
You
wanted
said
him
you
on
would
your
pick
team.
him over.
I
Zach.
said,
Yeah.
listen, the point was I was trying to be different, you know, make a different team.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Oh, just contrarian. Just contrarian for the sake of it.
That's why, and you know, it just so happens
me.
that he also picked Imperial to beat Vitality that one time too.
Oh, that's right, I did do that.
Yeah,
That
it's
didn't
like, I don't know.
happen,
There's
did
like
it?
an agenda against Iowa, I think. I don't know.
A few of us have agendas against Zaiwu apparently here. Oh, okay. Is that your shout out? That's your shout out
That's
note?
my shout out.
Okay, all
That's
right.
my shout out.
Pronogo, what's your shout out?
Oh man, I'm trying to think of like a quintessential moment of this podcast that I always like think back on, and honestly, a lot of it was the the Mantu over. I mean, there was also the MSL like love sort of thing, like the bromance MSL stuff that was really good. I appreciated that, and oh man, yeah, I don't know, like. I think honestly, like a lot of its server time for me was that like we built this thing that was more about like, yeah, there's some funny moments. Yeah, there's like our own, you know, quirks and eccentricities. But the thing that gets me is the fact that we had so much to say about the game and about and actually about the game instead of just like about drama and stuff. Like obviously when something would come up and like, you know, the Boomich allegations when he was leaving Navi and stuff and like or whatever, like there's all sorts of things that would come up as like touchstone moments. Like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. But like, we would go past that because that's the current event stuff. And then because it's kind of like the elephant in the room, if you're in the moment, you diffuse that and then you talk about the games. And like, that was really cool to me. The fact that we got to have like pick the brains of people like Snappy, Launders, you know, obviously Thorin and Richard Lewis came on a few times. It's like that kind of stuff to me was like the most memorable moments of the show overall. So I'll say shout out to that because that was like the fact that we were able to talk about the game and really genuinely like exchange ideas and debate points and obviously come up with our wacky, you know, takes and stuff. But like in general, it's just cool to have a podcast that was so focused on the game itself. So that's pretty cool.
Mix.
You know what I gotta do. I gotta shout out my boy Floppy.
Not
Shout out my
OC?
boy OC.
Oh, there it is.
Double shout out
Yeah.
to end it off. And that's it.
That's it.
Love that. Love that. That's a good one. I'm gonna shout out all the people that are tweeting about all the flaws in Counter-Strike. Because without them, I'm gonna. It's an anti-shout out for the Valve bootlickers. I get it. You want to believe that Valve are gonna do what's good for the game, and they're gonna help eventually make this very playable. But no, big shout out to everybody that's criticizing Valve right now for all the bugs in the game. Because without them, they're not gonna figure things out. They're not like the thing with this is like all these people are like, no, Valve's gonna do good. you're not helping.
Yeah.
You're not helping by saying that. Like, that's not doing anything other than maybe one Valve employee is going to read that and be like, yeah, I feel good about myself. No, I want them to feel bad so that they work harder. I want them to actually, like, we need negative reinforcement out here. And so, yeah, anybody that's criticizing Valve and what CS2 is right now, keep doing it. Keep playing the game, because CS2 will be better than CSGO, but that day is not today.
I have one more shout out. It's Valve putting Maus at #1 in their standings that just got updated.
Wow. Valve
Shout out,
standings. Valve standings, once again, stealing the show. Okay, I think that's it. We're gonna peace out. Great episode, everybody. And we'll see if there is a next time, but that might be it once again. That might be the last episode once again.
See you in like 4 years.